Oh, I think we're live. Beautiful. Thanks for the music, Yin. And welcome everyone today to the morning of the last day of the Beyond Mining Protect Land, Water and Life. Day 8. So that's pretty epic. Well done, everybody. And I'm really, really excited for this session, which we've called Alternatives and Visioning for Our Futures. So we're going to talk about visions for a better future and have space to dream and discuss what that could look like. So we'll have speakers and a few activities. But first, I would like to hand over to Professor Yin Paradies, who is a Wakaya man, an expert in cultural competency and Indigenous knowledges, who's going to get us started with an acknowledgement and some visioning. So thanks so much for being here again.
Thank you, Anissa. Yes, I'd like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri Wurrung peoples of the Kulin Nations and pay my respects to them as the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on today, and some others may be on this call, and thank their ancestors, past, present and future, for care and love and kinship with country that sustains us all today and always. Thank you. Would you like me to start with my presentation now?
Yes, please, if you are ready.
Okay. I just need to have enabled screen sharing and then I will do that.
Yep.
Okay. Yep, that looks good. Okay, today I wanted to talk to you about this, anticipating, attending, sensing and responding to decolonial futures. So it shouldn't be a very long presentation. We should have time for discussion, and there's also a small reading reflection that we can do at the end as well. So to start with, this is the problem that we're dealing with. It's essentially, for me, it's a problem of monocultural colonization. So this is a map of every country that Britain has ever invaded, not the ones in white. And this has all happened, of course, over only the last few hundred, 500 years at the most. More broadly, we see the same effect of generally European colonization, and this has created the kind of monocultural global economic and in many senses political systems that we are dealing with today. And we're trying to attend to and sense and respond to different ways of doing things going forward in this particular week of discussions and this session in particular. So here are some of the colonial pinning modern promises. In other words, you can think of our society now as a kind of modernity, if you want, or colonialism and modernity as connected. And sometimes people call that coloniality, to combine modernity and colonialism. And there's a number of decolonial scholars who are trying to understand how this works, essentially, and write pithy tables like these, which help us to understand. So Sharon Stein is one of those. So she talks about global capitalist economic systems, continuous growth and accumulation, and the racialized exploitation and expropriation of people, and of course, other than human beings, that underpins that. You can also think about the nation state political system as colonial in itself, private property ideas of security and national identity, and the violence that underpins the maintenance of those systems, both the borders, what happens beyond and within national borders. Ideas of Eurocentric knowledge systems as really crowding out other ways of knowing, doing and being that could form part of a different vision for the future and a different embodied future. Hierarchical social systems such as socioeconomic status, ideas of social mobility, merit, level playing fields, and these sort of things create kind of hierarchies of being, of valued being, of worthiness, if you will, of entitlement, of deservedness. that underpin a lot of the problems of our modern societies. And of course, big one, foundation of separation, the idea that humans are somehow exceptional or separate or unconnected and fully autonomous from the other life forms that we are actually deeply interdependent and vulnerable to. And this leads to instrumentalization of other beings and so forth. So, next slide. So the same sort of group, Sharon Stein and others who did that table, also have this interesting metaphor that they use to think about modernity, really, and reform of that. So they highlight as a kind of a game. They talk about this game of a society that we have now, and what does it mean for different people. So for some people, they've never been happier, wealthier, or healthier, and they really don't think there's anything to do to vision a new future. For some, there's some tinkering, some tweaking to be done in this first left-hand part of the slide, which is about addressing both personal calls for individuals to kind of personally self-transform, but also institutions to do that. In the radical reform space, we acknowledge the isms of racism, capitalism, colonialism, heteropatriarchy, nationalism, and so forth, and understand there are some very significant flaws in the way that modern societies work. And you could say the game is rigged. If we want to win, we need to change the rules of the game. And then this group, the decolonial, gesturing towards decolonial futures group, talks about beyond reform space, where we really understand that ideas of race and capital and heteropatriarchy are actually intrinsic and foundational to modern societies or to modernity. So in that sense, they're unfixable. And so you actually need to think about the game as harmful, something that makes us immature, that we're stuck playing until we actually find a new game. It's not about changing the rules, it's about completely transforming the game. And so they talk about modernity's palliative care, they talk about hospicing and hacking, and that, importantly, they talk about other modes of existence, other modes of cosmologies, that's sometimes called. So what could be a new game? And this is part of the visioning, or as I call it, attending, sensing, and responding to futures. So I wanted to have a quick example of what that might look like. This is the donut economic model that many of you may be familiar with. It's quite popular, and a lot of activism is going into moving economies towards this either steady state, degrowth, or sometimes post-capitalist ideas of the donut economic model. So I wanted to have a think about what these key terms in this model could mean. Obviously, they're very broad. You could interpret them in many ways, but they're often interpreted in quite standard modern ways. So I'm going to present you quite different decolonial ways of interpreting these key aspects of the diagram, both within this donut and outside the donut. So how would you decolonize or take a decolonial lens, one possible decolonial lens, to these ideas? So for me, energy, water, food, and housing means frugality, simplicity, and sufficiency within a thriving re-green commons. So we're talking about sustenance, shelter, communication, and transport. So thinking about not just where these necessary elements of life come from, but how people are oriented towards them, both collectively and in terms of their ideas of resource use. Health as flourishing, purpose, interdependence, self-realization, freedom, care, love, joy, and vulnerability. Quite different from standard public health discourses, for example. Education, income, and work as deschooling, localized communal means of production, celebrating creativity and expression via inquiry, encounter, and art. So really about deconstructing, destabilizing, and questioning institutions of education, institutions of work, and work ethics as things which are quite implicated in colonial ways of doing things. Peace and justice as thriving, feral, vivid, visceral, plural, messy, magical, sacred, embodied, sensuous lives. So not so much about law and order, about stability, about the absence of conflict, as such. Questioning what peace and justice mean, and another way of looking at those. Political voice as egalitarian, localized, empowered participation in decisions to the extent that one is affected by them. The motto that you may be familiar with is nothing about us without us. That's quite a radical form of political voice that would be incompatible with representative democracy. Social equity and gender equality, healing, humility, respect, wisdom, deep listening, generosity, the word owl as meaning belonging rather than ownership, beyond fairness, equity, and equality to embodying the impossibility of not sharing. So something that's not really what you think of when people say equity and equality. Networks as connecting with ourselves and others, so connection to body, mind, emotions, family, ancestors, spirituality, even more than human communities, culture and country, or land, sea and air, as recognition that we are all distributed, diffuse and diffracted relational bundles rather than things. Things come after relationships. They are kind of something that emerges from those rather than being fundamental to reality as relationships are in some ways of decolonial thinking, doing and being. And then to look at the kind of negative parts of the donor economics model, the sort of stuff that's gone wrong on the outside. So air pollution, ozone layer depletion, climate change, ocean acidification, chemical pollution, nitrogen and phosphorus loading, freshwater withdrawals, land conversion, and biodiversity loss. To me, these are actually just symptoms of much deeper problems. And those deeper problems are alienation from ourselves, other living beings, work, and so-called nature, debt, property, institutions, nation states, exceptionalism, growth, exploitation, extraction, consumption, reductionism, one way of thinking about truth or rightness and wrongness, power over, ambition, success, perfection, certainty, control, coherence, clarity, mastery, progress, heroism, fame, merit, entitlement, duty, sacrifice, arrogance, hubris, and human narcissism. This is not the visioning of the future part. I did those slides before. This is about how you identify and name problems, and at what level of the nature of reality as you see it do you do that? Do you do it at the level of air pollution, or do you do it at the level of ambition, control, and narcissism? And this is a great model that was done by social movement groups that really could form a way of thinking about decolonial futures. So moving from an extractive economy, which has got a worldview of consumerism and colonial mindset, exploitation, extraction, waste, enclosure of wealth and power, and militarism, to something that's more about a regenerative economy. This is focused on economy, but there's many aspects of society that will be radically changed when you start working at this level of economic transformation. To caring and sacredness, cooperation, deep democracy, regeneration, ecological and social well-being. And importantly, they talk about this as happening by drawing down, not just drawing down carbon, but drawing down money and power from the international through the national to the local. So it's radical relocalization that they're talking about. By divesting from the current system, starving and stopping, investing in new systems, and using a values filter through the soil here to think about things like justice, restoration, and relocalization and economic control. And some ideas at the top and bottom that I've added about what a vision of the decolonial future would look like: grateful, humble, ethical, radical abundance, and so forth. And specifics of what you would need to starve and stop, or divest from, or abolish if you were to move from an extractive to a regenerative economy. Things like stock labor and financial markets, interest, commercial banking, speculative construction, planned obsolescence. If we actually made mobile phones, for example, as well as we could, instead of to fail after a certain amount of time, we would use 70% less mobile phones in the world than we do now. redundant trade, where countries export 1,000 tons of tomatoes and import 1,000 tons of tomatoes in the same year. Advertising, of course, which is a terrible blight on society. High wealth, tax breaks, evasion havens, bailouts, and subsidies. Just some specific ideas there. And finally, just wanted to emphasize the importance of process. So this is ideas from some Indigenous scholars about how you do stuff, not just what you're aiming for. What is not just what your vision is or what you feel the future should be, but how you get there in a different way. So they talk about the importance of less hierarchy, more dialogue, inclusion, empowerment, the need to be humble listeners who practice deep approaches to learning and take criticism without dispute, planning with, designing with others, connecting, catalyzing, collaborating, not representing, moving at the speed of trust, centering lived experience, and particularly of those people at the margins of capitalist, colonial, modern systems. This is just another further detail in a paper that I wrote recently. I'm going to circulate this PowerPoint shortly, and you can freely download that online. Also, some ideas for learning more about Indigenous knowledges, books from around the world, from North America, from Aotearoa, New Zealand, from Africa, from Australia. Check that out in the PowerPoint if you want to learn more about that, and some other broader books that are very useful, I found, for visioning futures, not by Indigenous authors in this case, but by people who are also very interested in what the future could look like. And perhaps in some ways, reimagining the past that we don't understand well to help us move towards a different future. Okay, I'll stop there for some questions and discussion. Thanks.
Woo, that was amazing. I can't wait. I've already seen all those diagrams, but just looking at it again makes me think I've got to sit down, and we've really got to print them out really big and sit around them face to face so we can go through. So it'll be so good. Yeah, I think lots of people want copies of the slides. So please, please, please. Is there anyone that has any comments or questions off the bat? Awesome, and Yin's just chucked the slides in the chat. And maybe I'll chuck that on the Facebook Live for any of you watching live on Facebook. Oh, yeah, we have one question in the chat. And Lionel, if you want to unmute yourself and ask that, then that's completely fine. Otherwise, I can read it out.
Thank you. That was an excellent presentation. New sort of ideas from my point of view. Most of the concepts that were described appear to go against the existing system, the system that is based on currently, most of the, especially the governing systems. And wouldn't the implementation of such concept lead to some sort of antagonism and confrontation with the existing power structures? And how do we handle that sort of situation?
Yes, it's a good question. I think it will inevitably lead to some sort of friction or conflict, but the extent to which that happens is very much depends on the process that you take. So as you saw in the diagram where it talked about starving and stopping, and as you saw in the other diagram about moving at the speed of trust, I mean, what I'm suggesting is there's ways to make this happen without a revolution. I'm certainly not calling for any sort of revolution. I think that non-violent approaches, divesting, starving and stopping and growing different elements of a system are a way of doing this without direct confrontation of the system that we have. So the system we have is propped up by our actions in various ways, whether it's through the institutions we work at, our modes of and forms of consumption, where we choose and how we choose to work, these sorts of things. So you can starve and stop a system without directly confronting it, and it's difficult for the militarized hierarchical system here that we have to find an enemy to oppress and destroy if people are simply not participating in the system. So that would be my approach rather than any sort of direct confrontation or attempt to impose a new hierarchy, because this is fundamentally a participatory egalitarian model. It's not well suited to revolution. It's better suited to a sort of undermining of the conditions of possibility of modernity through withdrawal and rebuilding and regrowing and cultivating different ways of doing societies.
I have a question on that then, because I wonder, what sort of role does like decentralized direct action play? So kind of, because I guess for me, I see a lot of these anti-hierarchical, empowering worlds coming into being on the front lines of like, let's stop a coal mine. So I guess maybe that's not a revolution as such. That's just kind of like, look at that really bad thing. We're really, really sick of it. If we get together, especially in a country like Australia, where they're luckily not as likely to shoot us, then we can do that sort of action. And that's still part of your model of kind of localization? Yeah,
absolutely. I'm all for all the forms of nonviolent action, political protests and rallies and boycotts. I mean, these are all part of the story. And I think some of the models that you see developing in through, for example, the Occupy movement, the temporary autonomous zones, these are models, temporary, of course, but they are models for a different way of doing things. And you still need critical mass for this sort of stuff. So you still need to convince people that they want something else, or there are other things possible that are better than what they have. So making a noise, being visible, is part of that story, and showing the way, not just telling people what to do, showing them how you can do it. So yeah, it's all part of it. As long as you don't, I just don't think there's much point in getting too violent, because the system that we have is the expert on violence and oppression, and we're never gonna, even if we thought that was the way to go, we're never gonna beat the system we have on those grounds. We need to play the game in a different way.
Could I pose another question? Now, I agree with what Yin basically says about violent revolution and what we could do in the future. Now, there have been several economic models put forward by different groups and so on, and they are not necessarily green groups. So, for example, cooperative models, sort of say, for example, in America, Professor Wolf, sort of develops a cooperative concepts. And as you said, sort of to a certain limit, we would be able to build such cooperatives and bring people together and make them aware and sort of. But then in your presentation, you mentioned some cooperative communities sort of thing. And is there any specific model you propose? Or I mean, I'm looking for specificities. Sorry.
Yeah. Sure. I think that cooperatives are very important, and so workplace cooperatives, of course. Probably the biggest example is Mondragon in Spain, which has many number of people who work there. In terms of cooperative communities, there are of course a lot of small-scale intentional communities around the world, many thousands of those. But on a sort of bigger scale, I would be thinking of the Zapatistas and Rojava as a newer form of governance structures and models that are very different from what we have now. So yeah, it's can be done in living, can be done in working, can be done in, of course, social movements, recreation, any number of parts of life, and economics can become very cooperative as well. I mean, there are some obviously there are some sort of choke points or resistance points in the system we have now, which are going to be very difficult to address directly. One example would be nation states. The latest data from OECD, though, shows that a rising rate of failure of nation states. So they may, of course, simply fail of their own accord because they're not sustainable in the ecosystem that we have. So trying to break a nation state is probably not very useful, but tracking the ways that they fail and how we can encourage those conditions may be more useful.
With regard to Mondragon, they started small, but then grew very large. And then at a certain stage, they faced a very critical situation. And they were in crisis, and they had to go back to the capitalist model of the existing model. And I mean, I have not followed up, as to what happened later. Would you be able to enlighten us on what happened, and was there a way forward? Sorry.
I'm not going to pretend that I know the details of that. No, I don't know. But I think in general, failure is definitely going to be part of the journey. Yeah, and especially when we start working at scales. I mean, not everything scales up well, and that's part of the nature of the system we have is a lot of scaling up and down, and so it's definitely worth thinking about what qualitatively changes as things scale up or down. Why did that fail? What could be done better next time? Perhaps you shouldn't grow too big. I don't know. I'll have to read it up about what's happened there, but I'm not aware of the details of that recent development. No.
Thank you.
We have one question from Kim in the chat, and then we'll chuck to you, Andy. So Kim's asking, what are some of the reasons cited for the decline of nation states in the OECD? Stuff like that.
Well, they don't really go into a lot of detail, but essentially it's pressures on states through sort of geopolitical conflicts, but also the nature of declining resource availability. So it's going to be very hard to maintain these sort of pyramid hierarchical schemes that constitute nation states with institutions and so forth without resources. I mean, they take quite a lot of resources to run, and most of that happens through taxation of the people who are part of them. But yeah, the reasons for the failed states are, conflicts, games being played by larger countries in the geopolitical realm, and resource supply problems, essentially. And so the pressures will continue to grow with global warming on those.
Hi, everybody.
Go, Andy.
Hey, I promise there is a question to these, but a bit of context first. I think of myself as part of a number of minorities, and so I think that gives me a different perspective from the majority, which I happen to think is right. Might not be right, but I happen to think so because it's my opinion. And so I think I should tell these people that are wrong that they are wrong so they get it right. And so the first question is, or maybe adding on to that, I have also observed that people don't often like to be to be told that they are not doing things or that they are harming other people, even when it might not be my personal opinion, but the opinion, say, of a collective or something that is really obvious. So what I'm trying to say here is, when communicating and conveying new ideas and proposals and things like these. So this is the question. The question is made up of two parts. The first one is how forceful or intentional, or how much active action should we put into the change, or should we just leave it for it to happen, because if we do nothing, then things will happen. That is the first one. And the second one is, so how to do this? Maybe that's the question. So how forceful should we be? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, passion is definitely part of the story. Being passionate about change is important, and you don't want to tone that down or anything. But at the same time, you have to move at the speed of trust. We live in a complex, chaotic, emergent world. We don't know what, inputs will create outputs. It's not a linear exercise, and, very small, seemingly small effects can create vast transformations, like mass protests or revolutions or whatever. So we don't know. In essence, we don't know what our actions will achieve. But if our actions are important to us, and this is what we want to do in life, then we should do that. But being I wouldn't personally be very forceful in telling people what to do. I would be passionate about showing people what is possible and doing things myself and leading by example. And certainly be open and vulnerable and engaged in conversations with everyone from all spectrums of life who disagree with you the most. Those are the people who you should talk to more. But you don't have to be forceful. You just have to be open and honest and vulnerable and share and do and be in ways that may challenge their ways of doing and being.
Awesome, thanks so much. And we've got Lucho and Rog that want to answer, and then I think we'll move on to some of our amazing speakers from Latin America, where it's starting to get a little bit late. But please, Lucho.
Okay, thank you, Yin. I think your presentation have been very incredible, which they show in different ways to face the current situation we are living in. But as you would say, you will say that we are living in a situation, in a very chaotic situation where capitalism is not capable or is not able to solve the millions or the catastrophic situation we are living. Maybe it's too extreme what I said, but it's true, because everywhere it's a lot of situations happening where inequality and poverty and discrimination and exploitation is every day, happening every day. And us saying that, I think everybody is agree, and everybody needs to, or everybody is thinking that we need to change and we need to transform the current situation. We need to transform the system. Obviously, it's very difficult to think in the way or tell people what to do, and also it's very important to question or think about the situation of power, because what happened and what we face today is the power of the big companies, the power of the big business who are running the world. So in that sense, we need to get together. We need to be able to follow different examples of life, of movement, who are playing a very important role in building alternative to this situation of this current capitalist system. And in that way, I don't know what you think about this, that we need to build a power. We need to build power from us, from the people. And that power have to be, I don't know, violently peaceful. I don't know how we can face, this tremendous power the power that is dominating us now, today.
Yeah, it's a great question. And for me, I think what I think of is the importance of not facing the dominant power today on their own terms. We have to set up the conditions upon which we face them. And we do need to build our power and power of the people, but it's a different sort of power. It's a power with It's a power within, it's a power to, it's not a power over. You know, we don't want to use their model of power over. We want our own power of egalitarian, participatory, mass movements that just do things in a different way, that actually care about the motto, nothing about us without us, that really want people involved in decisions that are going to affect them. It's the complete opposite of the system we have. And confronting the system we have on their own terms, in their own way, that they would like to have a fight, is just a big mistake. You know, we can't do that. We need to. That's what I mean by, divesting and starving is you know, it's to starve the system instead of to challenge it to one-on-one combat. It's just got to be more likely to succeed.
Yes, sorry. That's, I think, will be the great scenario we should have, but the retaliation or the response of those in power, how we can avoid that, you know, because they're going to be violent. History shows that when people want to build something different, you know, elite react and violently, you know, destroy what the idea of the people. That's what is worrying me, you know. That's why I think how we can do that, how we can avoid that. That's a big question.
It worries me too. Don't worry. I've got the same concerns about that as you do. I mean, at what point can you, how far can you push them before they react violently? And so that's why we have to adopt kind of guerrilla tactics, I think. You know, it's a guerrilla warfare tactics. It's like you push here so far, but only just, not too much. And then you push here a little bit, and then you withdraw and you push somewhere else. You find the cracks, the weaknesses in the system, and you lever them, but not too much, because you don't want, you know, a Tiananmen Square type of effect when you're trying to do nonviolent protests. So I think it's a delicate operation, and we have a lot of knowledge. Not I don't, but in the movements that we have part of, we have a lot of knowledge about perhaps how to do this in a way that isn't going to wake the dragon as we slowly amputate it one scale at a time.
That's a great metaphor. I love it. And it also makes me think of conversations that we've wanted to have in this conference, and we will have over the next year, about nonviolence and what does that mean, and how can that work? Because it means a lot of things to a lot of people, and kind of, you know, protecting ourselves when we're being attacked. I would not say that that's, I would say that's still part of non-violence. So we can defend ourselves, but we have to be very careful that it's about defending ourselves and not going on the offensive. And that's something I think humans have struggled with. But maybe we'll chuck to Rog, and then, yeah, go Rog.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, this is awesome. I had some comments and big questions and like to pull this apart and put some counter things, but maybe could we just have a follow-up workshop on this? Since we've got some other speakers, or if there's a little bit of time at the end, but either or, I'll just might leave it at that. Yeah, there's so much in all this. Yeah, thanks. Is that, yeah?
That would be amazing, especially if we can see face to face and print them out big, because I can't even remember what's in half your diagrams. I've looked at them for quite a long time. Amazing. Well, Yin, yeah, is there anything else you want to follow up on?
I just wanted to say, have a read of the excerpt that I posted as well. Maybe Anissa can make a Google Drive for that too. It's just one of the best decolonial thinkers around at the moment is Bayo Akomolofe, and I just have a small excerpt from his book. I would suggest reading that when we start talking about how exactly to be otherwise is a really hard thing, and he has some good ideas about that.
Thanks so much. Yeah, we'll definitely share that. And yeah, I'm not sure how long you can stay around, Yin, for any more discussion, but thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, that was amazing. A really good start. And now I'd like to, I think, yeah, let's pass to you, Dani, if that's okay. People might have already heard from Dani so far this conference. And if you haven't, then definitely check out some of the previous sessions, because I've had the privilege of listening to Dani speak before quite a few times. And yeah, they're just really quite amazing. Dani's from the Izquierda Guevarista of Chile, which I think means leftist. Oh, you're going to have to translate that for me.
The Guevaras left of Chile.
Guevara, so that's like Che Guevara.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And they are currently residing in Santiago and have been doing heaps of amazing work with the Chilean popular movement and Coordinadora 18th de Octubre, as people have been seeing the amazing stuff that's been happening in Chile over the last year. So we're so grateful to have Dani here now to talk a bit about alternatives and visioning and maybe respond to some of what Yin has said. So thanks so much, Dani.
Great. Thanks for the introduction. I normally plan these presentations out a little bit. I didn't with this one because I thought a lot of things would come up, so I wanted to stay flexible. The trade-off for that is I might be a little scattered, so you'll have to forgive me for that. I do have a timer going, so I don't go too far over the 10 minutes, but we'll see how it shakes out. So I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. I'm currently situated in Picunmapu, which is the northern part of Wallmapu, unceded Mapuche land. And by offering this land acknowledgement, I hope to reaffirm my commitment once again to fighting side by side by the Mapuche people, supporting their struggle and all other indigenous struggles located in this territory. That's a really neat habit, by the way, the land acknowledgement that I picked up from you guys, so thank you. It's not really a practice here, but I think it's a cool one. So when we're thinking about alternatives to extractivism, I think was the name. I think that Yin introduced quite a few useful concepts, like maybe not in the exact terms that I would use. I would say probably like a lot of the things that he was talking about, and if I hope this doesn't end up being too much of a response to what he was saying, but since he's the one who spoke first, you know, I would maybe stick specifically with the concept of these systems that are ruling on us that make extractivism not only possible, but like the accepted norm, something that goes on in a form of exploitation that happens every single day. And so to put an actual name on this, we're talking about capitalism and its links to colonialism specifically and heteropatriarchy. But I will probably specifically be centering more on capitalism, hoping that we all understand that when I'm talking about that, I am also talking about these other things as they are not separable from each other. So when we're talking about wanting to build alternatives to extractivism, we really have to be talking about alternatives to capitalism, which means not only a change in administering the economy, as some projects have occasionally ended up calling that communism. If we're thinking about certain parts of Soviet history, for example, it was more of a changing in management than anything else. But we have to think about ways to really tear apart the actual underlying systems and structures that make extractivism possible. And so I think a lot of the things that Yin was pointing out in his presentation are quite accurate, talking about the systems in place that are the root cause. But I think where I have a certain discrepancy is when he talks about these individual motivations being the root cause of these things. So for example, he had that one really great slide where he was talking about some of the problems like air pollution or whatever, and these things being caused by ambition or other sort of like psychological flaws. I think that we have to go a little bit deeper than that and think about like, why are we ambitious in the first place? Were we in a system that is horizontal, non-hierarchical, where there is no scarcity, or where the community works to make a land with no scarcity possible, we probably wouldn't be ambitious. We probably wouldn't be power seeking. So at that point, the root cause is not like this inherent flaw in humanity. It is more so the systems that we are immersed in that lead us to behave and internalize certain forms of thinking. So while it's important to keep in mind that these are the ways that it plays out in individuals or in groups, it is still caused by like the big systems that are in place. And so the question that we have now is, how do we get rid of these systems? And in that point, when we're talking about how do we make an alternative to capitalism, then the question of how we actually get there becomes primordially important. You can't just say, well, we wake up one day and there is no capitalism and it's all great. I mean, it would be great if it worked that way. It's not going to work that way. And so here's where I get to the big part where I'm really in disagreement with his presentation, which is, talking about nonviolence as a way to do it, or putting a pressure on existing institutions to defund, or what was the other thing? It was defund and no, divest and starve the current system so that you can kind of step away from it. And while that's not necessarily inherently bad, like Lucho was saying in his question, I don't see a way for that to occur with no political violence, seeing that the state actors will always turn to political violence. For example, just based on my personal experience here in Chile, the second that people will start resisting things like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or even the movement that we had last year that was far more broad than just specific, resisting like specific extractivist initiatives, there was an immediate response from the state, from the police, from repressive forces more generally. If we go further back in history, of course, to 1973, the response was even more abrupt in this particular territory with the military out in the streets and a coup and everything. And so that's the reaction of capital once you start picking apart at different things. In the case of Allende, it was like, for example, nationalizing international industries. And in this case, it was a sort of like general consciousness raising of the population that led to heaps of political violence begun by the state. But I would go so far as to say that the self-defense, the people's self-defense that we have going on in ways that are more or less organized at this point is still political violence. It's not, I don't think I think we have to reckon with it as violence, which is why I do think that like whatever change we want to institute, we have to be prepared for that. And so when we're talking about how to make that change sort of happen, I think the main thing is that you want to build a base of popular power that is able to keep going and sustain these changes. And when we're talking about popular power, we're thinking about like three key elements that more or less come in this order, right? Like consciousness that we as a class, as an oppressed people, are able to do things on our own and are able to respond to our problems, and that we have like this collective material condition that unites us under an identity or something. You have organization, which is when that consciousness sort of takes shape and begins to form projects that are autonomous of the state and autonomous of capital. And then you have the power part doesn't come in until you have like some kind of material way to keep the forces of state and capital from entering into your projects. So the first two ingredients I would say are present in Chilean society. For example, like I was saying, the movement that started October 18th all the way last year was a huge leap in consciousness. People were suddenly talking about the wealth disparities, the ways that they were exploited constantly by the system, sort of generally speaking, the system in place, the things that they have in common with each other. And there was an identity of like, us as a people are being exploited and taking advantage of in these ways. And that's consciousness. And then organization is what happens when you take that at the local level and people begin to form assemblies, like local assemblies that will tackle problems that arise organically from the community. For example, during the pandemic, a lot of these territorial assemblies would organize local soup kitchens or similar initiatives to get people food once a lot of people had been laid off and were cut off from like access to any kind of income that would allow them to feed themselves or their family. And so that's the first two things. And then the third one, I think, is something we're still missing, obviously, otherwise we'd be in a different context and in a different situation, but it's something that you can observe within this territory in the South, in independent Mapuche communities organized in LOFs. I think other people could probably speak to this in more detail, Marisol, for example, but LOFs provide, like, they constitute a space where the state can't go in. Like, I mean, they try constantly, but you can't take it up. You can't, like, the state can't just roll into a LOF with a tank and kill everybody there or they could, but it's not worth their trouble. You have to have enough material power to back it up so that it's just not worth their trouble to go in and just mess everything up. The same is true, for example, in the two examples that Yin himself brought up were the Zapatistas and Rojava. Those are two examples where political violence is present as self-defense, as a way to deter state and capital actors to come in and just smash the whole project. Even though they probably technically, you could just, I mean, to exaggerate greatly, but you could just drop a huge bomb on Rojava. You could do it, but it's not worth the trouble it would create for any of the actors in place. So when I'm talking about like, you need the material backup for this, you don't necessarily need to have more guns or more tanks than the state. That's impossible. You're never going to have more guns than the state, but you need to have enough enough backup that makes it politically unviable for the state to come in and screw your entire project up. And I think Dandara might have a little bit more to say on this point, because the Movimento Trabalhadores, well, I don't know how to say it in Portuguese, actually, I'll just say it in English. The landless workers movement has some incredible experience on this too. Much more advanced than some of the stuff I've personally seen, like here in Chile and Santiago. But I think those are like the three things that are going to help us begin building from the level of like autonomous organization and managing of the territory and its people, but also expanding this alternative, really being able to resist in a meaningful way against the actions of state and capital and the repression it will bring to our people. And that will get us effectively to a post-capitalist future where we have this alternative that is focused on, I don't love the concept of democracy, but focused on like a direct control of the territory and the resources by the people who live there, for the people who live there. These are some of the notions that Yin himself brought up, right? But I think that we need to look at the concrete ways of getting there. And I would say those are that people power built on consciousness, organization, and a material backup that is important enough to face the state. I think that's how we do it. And I think with these 10 minutes and 56 seconds, I will now give the word back to you, Anissa. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That was really great, and it's so amazing. I guess it shows the flexibility for you to be able to say what you want to say, but also respond to Yin. And I'm just loving the agreement and disagreement. So thank you so much. This is the space for it. And I'm wondering if anybody has any specific comments or questions, or we could hear from Dandara, who I think will build upon what Dani's saying, and then we could go back into a bit more of a discussion. So speak now if you have something really you want to say, and also we'll be hearing from Marisol later on, so don't worry, we're not going to miss out. But yeah, so maybe I'll hand over to you, Dandara, which as Dani was saying, is it Dandara? Yeah, I want to be saying that right.
Yeah.
Is from the Landless Workers movement, which is in Brazil. And you can say it for us in Portuguese, because I'd probably also say it pretty badly. But yeah, and the MST, they've been fighting for popular agrarian reform and for social transformation for quite a while, and doing amazing things. Like, if we want to talk about popular power, I think the MST is a really good example. So thank you so much for coming along. Hand over to you, Dandara.
Thank you for having me. Tonight I have brought a friend.
Yay!
I'll play the Brazilian song first. Let me see. Quem sonha grande põe os pés na estrada, verá dia se concretizar. Latinoamérica, uma grande pátria, onde os abutres não irão vingar, pois nessa pátria só terá justiça, só vingará então fraternidade e a vitória de quem acredita em construir um mundo em liberdade. Uma cova funda enterrará para sempre fome, miséria e alienação. Um broto novo renascerá das massas e o ser humano se erguerá do chão. E para a cidade um novo projeto e o latifúndio agora em muitas mãos. Socialismo para quem faz história e ainda carrega o sonho em suas mãos. Socialismo para quem faz história e ainda carrega o sonho em suas mãos. There you have it. Let me just there, hydrate. So comrades, I wanted to begin with this song first, because then you will forgive me for my broken English and my broken script, because I'm really, really tired. But anyways, but also because we use music and art as a whole to communicate in MST. But this song is called Sonhar Grande. It means, it translates to dream big, to dream big. It's a song about the future. It's a song about our dreams, about socialism. It talks about, it says that in the future, people will rise from the ground anew, that we will have new projects for the city, for the countryside, that Latin America will be, I don't know if that's the right translation, but will be the great nation, La Patria Grande, a grande pátria, that we dream. It talks about justice, about kinship, victory, freedom, and it says that this future, this dream, this future belongs to the people that dare to dream, that make history, and that march to make those dreams come true. It also happens to be by my dad's, this song. I'm very proud of it. Anyways, it's a song we've been singing in MST for at least, I don't know exactly, but for at least 20 years now, maybe more, probably more. And talking about the future is really important when talking about extractivism and mining, and that's what we're doing today. First of all, tonight for me, because it's 10 p.m. right now in Brazil, but anyways, in my presentation at the opening of this event, I mentioned that MST has three main goals, strategic goals. And the first one will be land, then the second is agrarian reform, and the third, social transformation, and here we can say the word socialism. I went a little deeper into those three things in the first presentation, but now let's move on. Those three goals have been established from day one. In 1984, when we were funded, it's not the right word, when we were created as a national organization, and they are, these three goals, they are the fuel of our praxis, of our project, of our action since then. I also, in my last presentation, mentioned that fighting against mining standards, mining industry, is currently one of our main priorities as a movement, particularly in my state, Minas Gerais, where we saw tremendous, gigantic devastation because of mining practices, activities. It also appeared last time we were together. We are not fighting against mining itself as an activity. The world nowadays needs it, the internet, for us to be able to do this kind of conversation, this kind of amazing, tremendously beautiful, unimaginable articulations needs mining. So we are not fighting against the activity, but we are fighting against the industry and the underlying system, against capitalism, the system that allows economic and productive activities to be conducted with such little to no regard for life. So, because if we, I will go into a little tangent here, but if we were to fight against mining itself, because it hurts people and nature and anyways, and communities, socially speaking too, we could also say the same about, the agricultural activity. Because here in Brazil, especially, agribusiness is terribly dangerous for communities and for people, and deeply hurting the planet as well. So we want new standards of life in every aspect of life, under the control of the people, of the working class. So last time I was here also appeared the question, is it, does it make sense to fight against this standard, to create a new standard from a tactical standpoint? And I say yes, and I further it to say from a strategic standpoint too, because we know that this standard of mining, of agriculture, of life, of culture won't be finished. We won't be able to finish it under capitalism. We also know, in the case of MST, for example, that the agrarian reform that we want, that we demand, won't be possible under capitalism. But fighting for it anyways put us in an anti-capitalist stance that supports the struggle for our third goal, socialism. It goes like this, if I maybe crass a little bit. It goes like, we want things different. We don't like the way things are. We want them different. Well, it's not possible. Okay, let's make it possible. I want to swear so bad because anyways. So this fight is about building a new world where we can live our dreams of freedom and justice and everything that this song talks about. But at the same time, okay, so we are looking at the future. We are fighting for something now so we can live it in the future. But at the same time, dialectically, it's about building this future right now, this new world inside of this old crooked world that we live in. But it's not the same thing. I always like to touch it because it's very dangerous. It's not the same thing as humanizing capitalism or greenwashing capitalism. It's not trying to make capitalism better, but it's building new social, economical, political, environmental relationships against capitalism. In some senses, it may be too radical to say that, but it's in some senses, it's like a guerrilla. Is that right? Guerrilla? Anyways, you fight the long-term fight, a war, a whole war, with smaller, local, faster battles. You conquer territories, and then you protect and you grow those territories. Sometimes, in our case, those territories can be actual land, physical territories. And sorry, and sometimes it's winning a small scale election. For example, tomorrow in Brazil, we'll have the second, how do I say that? Second, I don't know, turn of the
second round of votes when you have one vote and nobody
and then
wins,
vote
and so you
again.
go to another one. Yeah, the second round.
Yeah, nobody won the first time around, so we are going to vote again in a lot of cities in Brazil. And although it's small and in some aspects might be insignificant, it's winning a small scale election is part of this guerrilla, of this conquering territories. Or it could be passing laws, local laws, could be building a school, or have the state recognize a school that we built, or growing food. Is what we call, I don't know if, again, if this is the right translation, but correlation of forces, forces correlation, correlação de forças in Portuguese. So MST, inside of all this mess, MST's main form of protesting, of exerting social pressure, or main tactical and also strategic action is land occupation. So we organize the families, landless families, and again, Dani, it's Movimento dos Trabalhadores Rurais Sem Terra in Portuguese. Movimento dos Trabalhadores Rurais Sem Terra. Yeah. So we organize the families, the landless families, we occupy the land, and it's always land that should, by law and by any measuring of human decency, of common sense, be distributed. We do it, we occupy the land as a way of denouncing Brazilians' land maldistribution, ill distribution, I don't know, the illegality of land accumulation, to denounce private property, the main cell of capitalism. But also, okay, so there's this strategic, long-term standpoint of occupying land project, but also because the thousands of people that MST organizes do need urgently a place to live and grow food. Many of these people are living in terrible conditions in the big cities because they were forced to move away from the land. They were evicted. They were in many ways of expelling poor people from their lands, we know. So they need this place to live. They need to work. They need to be able to have dignity, to feed their families, to have a home. So there's two complementary aspects in every action. The strategic aspect, the long-term, the project, the future aspect, but also the very urgent and one might say small, but it's actually big, objectives, goals, which is to have a place to live. So land occupation for us is both a way of solving urgent necessities and to fight capitalism in a very direct way, because when you say no, you denounce private property, you are fighting capitalism directly. So we have these places, we call them the encampments, not campments, but encampments. There's a whole political thing around it and symbolical. They are long-term. For us, they are permanent. The families are there to stay, fighting for that land too. And we organize this struggle in all fronts. So through the legal system, because the lands that we occupy should legally, by the Constitution, be distributed. We also communicate with society through the channels that we were able to build. So we have a whole communication sector. We grow healthy, plentiful, diverse food, and we use it to feed ourselves, to feed the people, and to communicate with society too. So, for example, now during the pandemics and quarantine and all that, Brazil and I believe all countries are, the poor people are in very bad conditions, very poor conditions. And we have mass unemployment, hunger. So MST has, in this period of time, donate thousands of tons of food to people. I found data from August that said 3.3 thousand tons of food. I don't know if I'm saying that right. But also, for example, we also, of course, organize to sell food, the food that we grow. So MST is considered today the biggest producer of organic rice in all Latin America. And this is created as a possibility because we have those territories. We conquered them. But of course, through demonstrations and marches, and also through political formal education, all of those are tools. Through culture and arts, I am from the culture sector of MST, and we have big festivals and big fairs, and both online and in person, not so much right now, but it's a very important aspect of our struggle, both as a tool, all of those things, education, street, demonstrations, land occupation, food production, communication, all of those things are tools, but they are also part of what can create new human beings and new relationships in this new society that we want to see. So what I'm trying to say here is every action has both immediate, daily aspects. Come on, this is not the word I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that they both have small scales and big, gigantic, strategic skills. They both serve as tools and as humanizing aspects of our struggle. Sometimes, to finish this thing, sometimes we are able to make the state legalize those territories, recognize those territories so they become settlements. Sometimes we can't. Many thousands of families live like decades under constant threat of eviction without, being able to think much of the future. And sometimes they are evicted and we have to start all over somewhere else. But no matter what, be it an encampment where everything's so dynamic and could change at any time, or be it a settlement where people have their own houses, have roads and electricity, because we fight for them, of course, water, all that. No matter what, our struggle is to create territories that are ours. They are the people's, to exercise people's power in those territories, self-determination. So I'm talking about the future by talking about the present, because the future is inside, is being built right now. The comrade that spoke first, I don't want to mispronounce it. Is it Yin? I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Comrade, and also Dani, talked about the examples of the Zapatistas in Mexico and Rojava. Obviously, MST's experience is very different from those. In many aspects, the Zapatistas and Rojava, they are way ahead of us in this building autonomous territories ruled by the people. They have armed militias and all that, and we don't. But the principles are the same, or at least they are deeply similar, which is building free territories, self-determined, autonomous territories, and building new relationships and new people right now. And as a mean of fighting against capitalism. So we're both recreating the present and creating the future instead of waiting for the ruin of capitalism, for capitalism to ruin itself so we can build the future, or instead of trying to humanize capitalism, which will never happen, or instead of simply giving up. We are fighting for a future right now and creating it right now. That's it, I think. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. It's very inspiring, and it makes me think of, I can't remember who said it, but talking about, I guess, we're building the new in the shell of the old. So we're doing it now, as well as creating a new future. So that's, it's just so exciting to see what's happening on such a large scale in Brazil, because it's not happening on any sort of scale similar to that here. So we might open up for some more discussion. And then, I'm not sure how much longer, Dani and Dandara, you can stay awake. So feel free to jump off to bed whenever you're ready. I did see one question in the chat from Andy that was asking, is there a welfare social safety net in Brazil or Chile? And Dandara, feel free to say whatever.
No, first I would just ask the comrades to speak very slowly because I'm very slow today. It's super late. This is one thing. And I believe, if I read it right, that the comrade was asking if this creating a new human being is, let me just open it up again. If, where is it? If it is a social safety net, the creation of new human beings. Is that the question? No, because Dani has.
I think the creation of new human beings was highlighting a concept. So he was responding to what you were saying and highlighting it conceptually. The question is about whether there is a social safety net in either country.
Okay, you want to go first?
Sure. I'll keep it brief. Not really. I mean, kind of, a little. There there is a public, in terms of healthcare, for example, there is a public option. There is also a private option. This leads to the public option being incredibly underfunded and being unable to really respond to everyone's needs, versus the private option, obviously, which is much better funded because people who make enough money will go to that and give that the money. And so that one works fine. And in education, you get a similar thing where you have private schools, subsidized schools, and public schools also are underfunded, whereas that money tends to go to subsidized schools, but the people who truly can't pay for an education at all will go to public schools, which are underfunded. Let's see, what else is there in welfare? For unemployment insurance, that's actually something that you yourself have to pay for. So out of your monthly paycheck, a certain amount is deducted and put into a fund, where if you are unemployed, then you can, that money will be returned to you. And for pensions, it works similarly, except it works like a stocks version. You, a certain amount of your money gets deducted and put into an, oh my God, we call, they're IFIPs, pension funds management companies, essentially, where your money gets invested in a certain stock portfolio, and once you retire, like a certain amount of it is given to you on a monthly basis, and it is usually not nearly enough to live. For example, like the minimum of it is under a third of minimum wage, which is already not sufficient. So yes, kind of there is a social safety net, but not really, there isn't one.
As for Brazil, it's very similar. In theory, everything is super sensational, amazing. It's an amazing system that should work. So we have what we call social security tripod. I think that's the word, where it includes healthcare, social assistance, and what would be called in English social security, which is a contributory policy. So as of healthcare, it's very similar. We have what we call SUS, which is we provides universal healthcare for anybody, including if any of you guys were to come to Brazil today, you all could be treated through SUS, this system. But it's deeply underfunded. It's there's a lot of corruption mixed into it. It's the current face of Brazil, right? The corruption. It's kind of true. So yeah, but it's amazing. For example, if I were to have gender reaffirming surgery, for example, I could have it through SUS, this system, which is considered a cosmetic procedure, although it's not. But I would have to wait months, maybe 1 year, maybe more, in a gigantic queue to get there. So also the social assistance would be for the people that can't afford social security to pay it monthly, like it is the example of Chile, to pay social security monthly. So we have this fund of social assistance, but it's also very underfunded. It's very, I don't know how to say that, but people, there are very tight criteria to cut people off of this policy. And then we have the social security itself, which you pay monthly to have the right for. But our last president, Temer, and our current president, Bolsonaro, they are invested into reforming the social security system, so it is being ruined right now. So yeah, it exists, but not so much. It's the same.
Thanks for that. And that's probably a big difference. In Australia, our social safety net is not enough. It's nowhere near enough, and people are still struggling. But it's definitely more. I'll go to you, Rog. You got your hand up.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, a question prompted by a little bit of side comment about what Dani said about democracy. I guess it's a question for maybe both recent speakers. Is the word democracy useful in social movements? Can we use it to call out the hypocrisy of capitalist parliamentary systems? you know, the sense where real democracy and socialism are kind of the same thing. And then to add on, I guess, about participatory democracy in communities, institutions, workplaces, social movements. Have a bit of a go at that, please. Thanks.
I love that you're tossing out probably one of the biggest questions I've heard in all 3 times I've been across this conference, and then you say have a little bit of a go at it. As far as, okay, I can take a shot at this one. Notions of democracy, I think, can be useful in terms of questioning sort of the internal logic of liberal democracy, any kind of system of governance under capitalism, and really any kind of representative system too. Like when I take when I said that comment about democracy, I was really thinking about how democracy tends to imply representation most of the time, unless you directly prefix it with direct democracy. Otherwise, you're always talking about a representative system in some way or another, whether it's elected, randomized, or confederate, I don't know. But then you are always talking about this representational notion where some people are giving up power to another group that will represent them politically, which implies a sort of political tutelage, taking away agency, political agency from a majority group, and also a hierarchy where some people are actively making decisions and executing decisions, and other people are simply expected not to participate in this. And that is where I think talking about direct democracy is maybe more true to what we want to construct. But you know, you have to still be careful to always prefix it with that. But I do think that talking about direct democracy is useful in terms of getting people to reflect on whether the political system that we have now is the one that we really want to be in. Do you really want to say, like, this is true democracy when you are ceding your political agency to people who are supposed to represent you but actually represent the interests of capital, or other things, but primarily that. And so I think in that sense it is useful. But when I'm talking about the future I envision, I tend to personally shy away from that.
If I can add a little something on that, because Brazil right now is under a lot of pressure to defend its democracy. Bolsonaro's government has touches of dictatorship, has touches, it flirts with fascism. So we found ourselves, I agree with Dani 100%, but we found ourselves, MST and other movements and parties and organizations, being the ones that have to defend the bourgeoisie democracy against the dictatorship dreams of our president. And not only him, if it was only one person, it would be easy, but the tendencies of authoritarian tendencies that society lives right now. So I worry about it because Bolsonaro were able to get elected, seeing as he's stupid as a door. He got elected because Brazilian people are deeply disappointed with traditional politics and with traditional democracy. And we understand the people are right to be disappointed. And we have an alternative. We have a project, but we don't have the same means to disseminate, to get the message across as the right and the bourgeoisie has. So Bolsonaro were elected because people hate the representative democracy that we now have in Brazil. And we that hate it too, like, damn, we don't have any idea of most of the things that happen inside the government. But we have to defend it right now because it's what's standing between us and dictatorship and authoritarianism and such. So it's very frustrating. Just my 2 cents about it.
Thanks for that. And I love that description of Bolsonaro. I think, Lionel, you had a question or a statement you wanted to make?
Yeah, thanks, Anissa. Okay, now there are lots of questions, but I want to ask simply one. I need to make a comment before I ask the question, because my background is originally I'm from Sri Lanka and I live in Australia now. And I think it is exactly similar to what Dandara explained, what is happening in Brazil, and that is happening in Sri Lanka. You know, sort of, if you look at the history of Sri Lanka, we have had 3 major armed conflicts. In 1971, where majority Sinhalese, about 10,000 were killed by the government. And in 1988-89, where about 60,000 Sinhalese were killed. These are from the majority community. And from 1983 to 2009, there were more than 100,000 Tamil people killed in armed conflict. So we have a very sober situation. And so we are looking at alternatives, you know, sort of what can we do to make the situation better. We are also having the same problem you explained as to what is happening in Brazil between representative democracy and direct democracy. You know, sort of say, now the Sri Lankan regime as it is, you know, represented by Rajapaksa family, they are moving very fast towards an authoritarian regime, and they will be using fascist tactics, definitely. But then, you know, sort of, because although we hate representative democracy, as Dandara said, but we still can't move there because there is a huge gap between the people and us. So how do we fill that gap? So we are trying to focus on that, and actually there are so many discussions now being held within the groups in Sri Lanka about that. Now, my question is basically going to, you know, sort of, we are also thinking of the same models, you know, where we could establish cooperative sort of structures in agriculture, in industry, in other areas, where there would be more direct democratic models implemented. But then how to go about is very unclear, because people do not like that idea. And we discuss cooperative models, but people reject it. We don't want it, right? So how do we get across? And in your experiences, actually, Dani was explaining the same thing, but I think because I couldn't, my background is not English speaking, so it was a bit difficult to understand what you say. You were too fast for me, but I knew she was coming from the same angle. And my question is, with regard to the encampments or settlements or land appropriation models that you have adopted in Brazil, I think it is a bit similar. I could compare it with, say, what Mao did in the People's Democratic Revolution. You know, sort of he established base camps, you know, so in certain villages, they established power in certain villages. But it was different in the sense they had economic power, but also military power. You know, they had their own regime, you know, sort of military forces defending that part. Whereas in Brazil, it doesn't happen. Now, when people establish these sort of areas where they apply models of direct democracy, like cooperatives, that at a certain stage there will be a confrontation, as happened in, of course, we can't compare Rojava with that situation. Rojava is slightly different, but Rojava heavily relied on Americans, and ultimately, you know, they were, you know, just let alone, and now I don't know the current situation. So what is the experience of these land appropriation and settlements and so on? With have there been any clashes between the state and the attempts you made for direct democracy, and how did you overcome those problems?
Thank you, comrade. You touch very important things. So let me try to summarize them. How we go about it, I think it's very important. First question. So we, MST has a whole structure, we call it organicidade. Usually we don't translate it because there's a very deep meaning to this word, but it's a way of organizing ourselves that has a lot of Lenin touches to it, but it's our own thing. So we have this whole structure. We have nationally that's articulate, although every state, every city has its own particularities. But we have this structure. So we have comrades whose responsibility is, we call them Frente de Massa. Their responsibility is to take care of these encampments, is to look at potential properties that are illegal and could be distributed, and we could have, by occupying it, we had a chance of establishing enough pressure to have a victory there, or to establish an important fact there. So there's people that study this. There's people who organize the people. We are all the time doing grassroots work in the cities, but also in the countryside, because there's a lot of people who live in the country, who work in the fields, but it's not theirs. They are paid, they are employees. So we are always doing this work. And then we know of this particular property that's there, that's important, that's illegal, and therefore should be distributed. We organize the families. It's a very step-by-step process, and we occupy. It's not easy, it's not safe. There are confrontations with the state all the time. If it were only the state, it would be a little tiny bit better, but it's actually against also the also called owners of those properties and their paid security. Usually it's a type of security that's illegal, informal, has tints of militia. So we have to face these people. What give us a little bit of safety is that we are not isolated in that occupation, in that encampment. We have a whole national structure, and we have a whole, thanks to processes like this, we have also means to call for international solidarity when it's needed. So we have, in this big structure of ours, we have lawyers, because we are fighting for something that is in the law, is legal by the Constitution. So we have lawyers that fight in this front to make sure we get that land or that we are not evicted. But I think Dani mentioned that we have to have support from the people locally and nationally, internationally. So, for example, the dedication that we have to grow healthy food and to protect nature, it speaks to society. So we donate food, we sell food, we make fairs in the local, cities or nationally. We have stores, MST stores in, I think, 7 big cities right now called Armazém do Campo. So all of that is a way of feeding our people, but also communicating our project. And all of that protects us. So yeah, it's not easy. When it comes to actual physical violence from the state or from the owners, we don't have, how can I say that, an armed branch. MST is not this kind of organization. So we don't have means to fight the same fight. We fight in our own terms. So for example, this year we had a terrible threat here in my state. Maybe you have heard of it, in a place called encampment called Quilombo Campo Grande, that produces coffee, and 14 families were evicted that day. But that day, it lasted 3 or 4 days, detentions. The police was there, the military police was there for 4 days or 3 days, now I don't remember. And we don't have guns, anything like that. But we have people and dignity. So we brought a lot of people to the front to kind of physically stop the police from passing. And we created a barricade of food and flags, MST flags. Here we have it. Of signs. There's, oh my God, it gives me goosebumps. There are beautiful photos of children holding those signs against the military police, saying, please don't evict us from our houses, don't destroy our school. They destroyed a school that was built inside of the area. So yeah, we don't have the means to fight physically, but we have all of those other tactics, but also, yeah, it's a matter of political strength and communication and dignity. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it was a really good answer and really beautiful image. If you have any of those photos, feel free to send them through so we can share them. Yeah, that would be amazing. Now, I'm wondering if there were any more questions or if we should go to another song and then hear from our last 2 speakers. I'm wondering how you and Dani and Dandara are going. Marisol sent me through an awesome Mapuche rap song, which I think I'm really excited for because I need another cup of tea and I want to get G'd up again. So if there's any last comments or any questions, or we can, Marisol, do you want to tell us a little bit about the rap?
I'll just a minute. I'll just share my screen and show 3 or 4 pictures of those days.
Amazing. Yeah, wow. Look at their helmets. Oh, you're on mute.
Been talking and talking. Damn it. So again, I'm sorry. Did you were able to get that one, or I was mute already?
I think you were on mute. Yeah.
Okay. So this one just says, this is the entrance of the area. This sign says, eviction during a pandemic is a crime. The next one is the children with little signs that says, don't take my house, my home away. Oh, it's really small. Landless youth for life and for our rights. This blue one says, Zema, go home. Zema is the governor of the state. Let me see the other one. Here, you see the smoke here. There was a moment where fire was set in the grass. Yeah, it says, the big sign in the fence says that Quilombo Campo Grande, which is the name of the encampment. Culture is very important to us, so we name everything. It's so Quilombo Campo Grande, like keeps fighting or something. Don't evict us during pandemic. Anyways, it was a very, I don't have right now the picture of, I'll stop sharing. The pictures of the food aligned in front of the police. And they had to, when they finally evicted those 14 families, they have to march over the food. So it's a very powerful image. It's both symbolically and, I don't know, psychologically, because police are people too, right? So yeah. I'll try and find some more links and videos to send. I can send Lucho and then he can share. That's it.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, getting the songs and the images and all of that is so important to this struggle for a better world. So thanks for that. Dani, I'm not sure if you had anything last to say or.
No, I mean, thank you so much for the experience of being able to participate, not just today, but this whole week. I was on a couple of other panels earlier, and it's just been a really great experience with some really wonderful conversations. And I feel like I've learned a lot this entire week. So just thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. I'm sure we'll speak again soon. Cool. Marisol, do you want to introduce the rap?
All right, just brief. It's called Newen. Newen, as I mentioned in a few, places during this conference, is means strength, fuerza. So that's why I always said a lot of Newen, so a lot of strength. And these are a mix of Mapuche indigenous who grow up in the cities. So this is the awakening of the indigenous Mapuche, the third generation who grew up in the city, and today they are moving back into, you call it here in Australia, moving back to country, but we call it in learning the language, start playing the games we play back into our culture. And the song talk about the current political prisoners, the Waishafis, who are the spokespersons of our communities who are in jail at the moment, and also our Loncos, who are our leaders, and yeah, they talk about that history. So cool. Hope you like it.
Thank you. Here we go. Oh, wait. Let me make sure I'm sharing it properly.
There's no way, keep going. Go Newen, keep going. Yes, there's love again. There's never give up. 500 años y aún estamos en guerra. A nuestro pulfique sería nuestro vivo que es la guerra. Porque fueron ellos sino Jesucristo quienes nos entregaron su sangre, como hoy en día lo hacen nuestros presos en huelga de hambre. Marrachi huevo el pan que va a recuperar Gualmapu destrozando su sangre de Guaychape. La hierba de su mate sabe de amargura con chueca de luma. Todo listo para el juego, los Peñi bajan del cerro por el camino del Puma. La luna y el sol, testigo de los tigos del Huinca. Pero el pueblo no se hinca, bebe el muda y del trigo. Sana sus heridas con llantén y matico, me explico. Vuelva a tus raíces, quiero que olvides 500 años que Catrileo resucite.
Todo lo que hacemos no es en vano, estamos, reforzamos la identidad, las raíces rescatamos, vamos, nuestras voces escuchamos, con este canto razonamos, nos acercamos, nos asaltamos como hermanos, unimos nuestras fuerzas, con el rap nos expresamos. El sentimiento del pueblo representamos. Rumekein al ambien un cantui. Rumekein al ambien un cantui.
Kirhupu posnieli, liftung etami tsukaya al feli, alo kuifi, Celestino Córdoba Malacoli, Rehuesa Zungumuli, Feimuta Incaya Inta, Impuche, G. Las redes sociales son puro relleno, se habla como mapuche pero actúa como chileno. El rap se dota de contenido en cura rehue, o si no, no tendrá sentido como machi sin rehue.
Ya llegó ese Nehuen que nos une como hilo de telar, Patar Huaychan. Ya llegó ese Nehuen, más que urbano o rural, mapuche tainkin. Ya llegó ese Nehuen, como Feyentun de Niyatun, Kupape Tainkeun. Ya llegó ese Nehuen.
La mapuchada de los barrios al armar el ritmo, como el cantún, kumeki, montañica, boom, pa' crear el himno. Así como la Phil Montero, rapper, nego el hip hop. Cuchun retumba, causa el sismo, Dani puche en cura rehue. Con el piu que se mueve, así como en la pobla se reúnen nuestros peñi. Neguen de sobra es lo que nos sobra, si es lo que quiere. Lo muestra el Huaychape en el campo, puta neguen de la
Unos piensen caminan por el sendero de la Uquín. Cada uno es una fuerza que conforme ese mallín. Siglo trapo, loco y fieste, de un quedó amarrado. Compromiso de palabra, nudo de guayas pellinao. Se ha levantado como recordatorio, convocando los huerquines de cada territorio. Al ritmo del bombo y caja, fortaleciendo el Nurchan. O el cantún que retumba como sonido de Chalcán.
Justicia para Marileo, Brando, Puente Gol, Fabiola, Antiqueo. Represión como Nayotzinapa. Genocidio, hoy Estado de Chile lo tapa. En Gualmapu no en bienvenido el Papa. Brotamos como cigüeñe en invierno. Nosotros estamos de pasar, Nehuen es eterno. Tanta evangelización, usurpación a fondo. Wifi que se yem, hacen el retorno.
Porque mi pueblo está volviendo. El cuerpo terrenal muere, pero el ser interior sigue viviendo. Ta incuifi que che nos están reuniendo, resurgiendo desde el sur. Vengo, por supuesto, defendiendo lo nuestro, descubriendo la verdad de mientras la educación y la TVT están confundiendo. Left Ulcantun, Mabuzungun aprendiendo, fluyendo como el Eufula. Guapichazo represento.
Pupeñica, Pulamien, Amulepe, Tainwechan, resistencia lirical, hip hop underground, octava versión del Nehuen hip hop, hasta Curarrehue desde la sexta región, Haucanul Cantún, Inche Tapicunche, Sunguntañi Piuque, sonido que ruge, ancestral la causa del pueblo mapuche, yeah.
Hoy vuelve otro hijo que habita en esta tierra, el espíritu se eleva, mi respeto es para el pueblo originario y su pelea, de rabia contra el Paco y el político que vea. Ideales nunca mueren y las fuerzas no flaquean, fluye el conocimiento. Nehuen hip hop brota en el suelo de ancestros y es la misión lo nuestro, llevar este mensaje sin nada de maquillaje, o sea rap duro y directo.
Fuerza, agarramos respeto con Nehuen hip hop, PDS, el famen, yo el puto sistema opresor. De Cañete a Curarrehue, en las que Mapu no desiste.
Humanos quieren control, pero la tierra resiste.
El pueblo no duda prepararse, que alzar la voz, hagamos frutos de la tierra, somos frutos del hip hop.
Las cuatro ramas dando lucha cuando es mucha la presión.
Somos guerreros sin capucho y nuestro cantún es del sol.
Chaliwain Maipuche, Tainpuche, Comnemun, Gualmapu Muley, Nehuen Gulcatun, Curarrehue el Fun, Chagulay, Namulepe Tain, Yamugual, Peñicagual, la Mielcagual, Fenquita Mapuche, El Pita Infucha Queche, Mautu que la Yain Puwe Chafe, Muntuto Inta Mapu, Cachintu que la Yain Tain que monta, Requiduanta Infecan.
Ya llegó ese Nehuen que nos une como hilo de telar, Patarhuaycán. Ya llegó ese Nehuen, más que urbano o rural, Mapuche Taintin. Ya llegó ese Nehuen, como Feyentunden y Atún, Kupape Tainkeun. Ya llegó ese Nehuen.
Agua que cae pura de la montaña, ríos que fluyen libres en su caudal. Árbol sagrado en medio del capital, resiste la raíz de la tierra ancestral.
Hoy vuelvo al rap con las mismas ganas con que mis hermanos se defienden cuando allanan. Vamos a ponerle el pecho a tus balas. Nuestro mensaje hard y prende en flama, camión envuelto en llamas, me salen ramas de los brazos. Vivimos en un estado policíaco donde falta el agua pero no sobran los pacos.
Este flechazo certero, si el buen camino matamos, mataremos primero. Con rap mapuche afilado, aquí con punta de acero. En rap cura, se vuelven a juntar los guerreros. Ahí me cuenta, cuento me que tú me que ni quema. Vivo wiñona, cuento le haya y no cabirá. Compañía de mal todo me mantiene, voy echando el cantón. Y si tú quieres, ne güey, cheque, cheque, cabrón.
Acá se plasma la historia, en todo el Mapu quedará en la memoria. Con 8 años de trayectoria y la finalidad de entregar un mensaje consciente. Nehuen hip hop flugiendo fuerte. No queremos invasión, por eso nace esta canción. Basta ya de represión, Mapu la liberación. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Es Nehuen hip hop.
Yeah, that was great. And now I'll hand to you, Marisol.
Yeah, that's a very strong song because, as I mentioned, it talks, as you can see, all those young people, you know, they are from the main cities, you know, they are the third generation of those indigenous who were displaced from our land when first forestry companies moved into Mapuche land. And as you can see, independently of the racism, you know, that their grandparents, parents, and I'm 100% sure they are also experiencing a lot of racism, they still feel so proud to be Mapuche. You know, they are in that process to, yeah, to highlight how important is, you know, the connection they have now with the land. And most of them are ready to go back into the territory that has been occupied by multinational corporations for over 30, 40 years. So I think it's a very important process, very inspiring, happening at the moment. And I would like to start saying, you know, for me, I think this conference has been so important. But I think it's important also to representing one part of the indigenous voices, because I cannot say that I represent all the Mapuche, you know, every time I speak. No, I'm a Huilliche, so most of the time I represent my people, you know, more than all the other Mapuche. But I can talk about all those brothers and sisters, you know, who work with me. But before I move into all this, I would like to acknowledge, you know, that I am in Wurundjeri land for the Kulin Nations. I would like to pay my respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. And I would like to make clear that this land where I am at the moment, Nam, has never been ceded. My name is Marisol, as I mentioned the other day in one of the discussions that we had. Inchi Marisol Pinien, and Mari Lamien, Mari Kompuche, Amulepitain to all of you, Mapuche Taishin to all of you too, and Nehuen, as I always mention. I will say that we cannot, you know, design a future, you know, of well-being and happiness, you know, by destroying the whole chain of livelihood, existing in nature. And I think this conference has been about that, has been about talking about those multinational corporations who are in the process, they have been for years in the process to destroy our livelihood, destroy nature. Nature, from the point of view of Mapuche people, and I'm sure all the indigenous people around the world, give us all what we need, So in nature is there all what we need to survive. For Mapuche people, at the moment, the only way we found that we can defend our life, that is mean our land, is confronting the Chilean state, So that's what we do at the moment. No matter if we don't want or we don't plan to confront the Chilean state, it's simply that's the way they see it, So our communities, as I mentioned, are militarized. So Mapuche land is militarized. And people cannot forget that we don't have the freedom to do what we want. So there is always an eye. They're keeping an eye on us, keeping an eye on our way chefs, who are our spokesperson, who move from one, territory to another to talk about what's happening, how we can plan future ways to defend ourselves together in unity. So they jail our loncos, they jail our young people. There is false accusations of anything or everything you can imagine to keep them in jail. So looking into that context, because that's the reality of the Mapuche people daily, independently of the socialist government, democratic government, whatever government is in power, the situation of the Mapuche people haven't changed, except in when Salvador Allende was in power. But after that and before that, always oppression. There is no respect for indigenous sovereignty, for indigenous autonomy, self-determination, So that's why we fight for that. So that's our future. That's what we want. We want self-determination. We want autonomy. We want to have the power to decide what to do in our land, how to manage our natural resources. So that's what we want. That will be our future, if that's what we are talking in this panel. The soil is one of the most important part of the survival of the Mapuche people, because we are connected to our land. See, that's why we are Mapuche, yeah? As I explained before, Mapuche, people of the land. You see, the name is very clear. That's we connect with our ancestor through our land. Our cosmovision, our spirituality is all connected. So you push us to the main cities, we don't know who we are. And you can see that. You can read documents about all those Mapuches exiled, because that's the way we see it, exiled from their territory into Chilean territory, as they call it today. They survive in hiding because of racism, hiding because there is a lack of opportunities for indigenous peoples around the world. So I will say that alternatives, we have a really good way, of surviving. That's why we have been over 500 years, in our land without building, what's happening today, hydroelectric companies as a way to make money, or open our land for mining companies, forestry companies, gas. We don't need that. That's what the Western society, that is what Chilean people today are. They need as a way to survive, but we don't. As I mentioned, we need, you will say that I'm probably too old and crazy, but indigenous people, we need an uprising. We need an indigenous uprising all around the world. That's what we need. We need an international campaign of awakening, where indigenous, we need to unite and highlight, what is oppressing us. We need to do it. We need, if it works, the current governments need to open a space for indigenous people to make decisions about their territory, as I just mentioned. You know, there should be law. If we are still with the system we have at the moment, it should be an indigenous law, very clear, where it said that traditional owners of the land should be in charge of the way of living, you know, decide over their territories. And from there, we can go back into the way we used to live. And still some communities are trying to go back into the way we use the treke. You know, the treke was and is a very important way of sharing what we produce with those communities who don't produce the same products. But they share with us what they produce and we don't, you know. So way of living, but at the same time, way of making sure everyone has what they need. Also, I will say that we need to put an end to free trade agreements. You know, for indigenous people, free trade agreements are a death sentence, because with these free trade agreements, if I talk about Latin America, you know, our governments allow United States, Canada, you know, to do whatever they want in our territories, you know. And when I said whatever they want, I mean killing us, displace us, take our voices, you know. So for me, moving forward means also to start campaigning against free trade agreement who allow multinational corporations not just to destroy our environment, you know, to do whatever they want. They get so much, you know, benefit for them to come and destroy our land, you know. So it's examples, you know, in many places, part of the world, multinational corporations like mining don't pay for the water they use during the mining, you know, all the water they need to do mining. But the people who live around the mining, they do pay for the water they consume. So things like that. You know, we have other companies that I can mention who endanger our natural resources like water, like Coca-Cola company, for example, that many people love Coca-Cola products without knowing that our water is there and it's for free for them. Here in Australia, I pay for water, but no Coca-Cola company, because part of the free trade agreement, they can get it for free. How can that be fair? How that can be a good way, you know, to make business for the majority of us? So, yeah, of course, I would like recognitions, you know, that we indigenous people are the guardians of the biodiversity, you know, that governments should, you know, look into indigenous way of living, you know, around the world to learn from us, you know. If I talk about my people, the Mapuche people, the way we, the Mapuche, we look after our land, we call it Ñuque Mapu, yeah? So our Ñuque Mapu, that is very important, and they should promote it. They should promote the way indigenous people look after the environment and yeah, pay attention how the territory was before multinational corporations moved into the indigenous land. It's so important, you know, to know who you are, to know your culture, in our case, our cosmovision, you know. We need to bring back our, you know, ancient knowledge. We need to have a voice, because we don't have a voice. Indigenous people, we are not just militarized, our communities, also we are, I don't know how to say it, we are segregated, probably that's the word. Segregated, is that an English word? Sometimes I get confused, too many languages, boop, boop. My brain is like, which? And segregated and oppressed, we have a lot of oppression over us, as I said, in Colombia, everywhere. If I talk about Latin America, the oppression, you know, with these multinational corporations who come to indigenous people for defending the land, is our life. You know, we put our life every day. You know, I live in Australia, probably that's the reason I'm still alive. But with this board, with this, the way I'm speaking right now, the way I campaign here in Australia, if I do that back home, probably I'll be one of those, you know, thousands as a list of people killed, you know, for no reason, you know, without no one being responsible for the death of one indigenous more, you know, troublemaker. So, yeah, we need to, I will say that. For me, moving forward, I will repeat that, We need Indigenous uprising all around the world. We need to stand up. We need to move. We need to be clear in what we want. We need an international awakening. You know, we need to highlight how we look after our land. What do we do? What traditional owners of the land, you know, do to live in harmony, you know, with our environment. And free trade agreements out completely. We don't need them. We don't need multinational corporations. We don't need them in our land, you know, polluting our water. We don't need them. So not sure what else I can say. That, yeah, we need to stop somehow the devastation, you know, that is happening at the moment around the world in Indigenous territories. I was watching a video yesterday, what's happening here in Tasmania, and it made me so sad but happy at the same time, because it reminds me of my land. I come from an island, from Chiloé. Chiloé is in, you know, I'm from Cukau. You probably, this sounds like a blah, 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 gibberish. You have no idea what I'm talking about. Well, Cukau is the name of the town where I come from, and Chiloé is the island that is at the end of the south of Chile. You know, so it's as a joke with some Australian friends, I said my pets were not dogs, were the sea lions, you know, because it's true that you walk in your land and they come out and you interact with them, you know, so you have no drama. And as a Wijishi woman, you know, you can see how they come into your land to destroy your land. And in Tasmania, they are planning to do the same thing, you know, beautiful forests, landscapes, you know, and they are in that process, you know, to transform that in timber, you know, as you can see in the middle of the beautiful ancient forest, empty space with all what they leave behind when they don't need nothing else from that piece of land. You know, it was sad, but at the same time, to see people fighting, exposing themselves, putting themselves, you know, in danger in the sense that you can go to jail, you know, to defend those trees, I think is amazing. So we need more of that, you know, we need to unite. We need to make sure we organize support for Indigenous communities, not tell them what to do. Believe me, I had the experience of that when I was back home, and also at the beginning when I came to Australia. You always find people who think they can tell you what to do, and yeah, it's a different solidarity, yeah. Yeah, different kind of solidarity. But yeah, we need to bring back our ancient knowledge, you know, and yeah, that's the only way we can stop the effect of climate change. Yeah, I will say that sovereignty and self-determination, autonomy for Indigenous people around the world. That's the alternative. Without those, no alternatives. Dun, dun.
Hey!
Because everyone was so quiet, so like, did I say something wrong?
No, it's so good. We're sitting in silence of, yeah.
I don't know. Believe me. It's, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, you spoke.
Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And it's, yeah, I guess it's been a central theme of the conference, of the importance of Indigenous sovereignty, autonomy, and knowledge, different Indigenous knowledges for us to kind of relearn, a lot of us that have lost the ability to live with nature. So yeah, thanks so much for that, Marisol. Really well said. I'm not sure, do people have any questions or comments? There was a question that Andy put in the chat that maybe we could talk to for a bit, and then we have one more speaker, Ron, who's here. And we do have a video from Marianna, who's couldn't make it but sent through a video of alternatives. It does go for about 17 minutes or something, so maybe after we've had a bit of discussion, heard from Ron, we can put it on and people can either watch it now or later. The question from Andy is, can some Indigenous people get corrupted by the system and forget how to protect land and life? What is the source of self-corruption? I don't know if you want to talk to that, Marisol.
Is that for me? Yeah. Of course, Andy. Yes, totally. Don't forget that we have been invaded twice and colonized. So yes, we do. We have Indigenous who, through the church, totally changed their view and they lost their common vision. They lost who they were and who they are. We have Indigenous people who believe in political parties. My apologies for anyone here who belong to a party. Of course, that totally changed. We have what we call Yanaconas, Andy. We use the word Yanaconas. Yanaconas are those Indigenous who betray their people. They are the ones who betray us during the time the Spanish, were in the process to invade. And the way Spanish people, managed to move close to the Bio, close to our land, was because they had Yanaconas, Indigenous who were helping them because they knew how to get into our land. So they were helping them. So yes, we do. From those days, we have Indigenous people who betray their own people for whatever reason. And today we do. We have some Mapuche who are so scared. They don't imagine. I don't make them responsible, but I try not to justify them also. But I cannot imagine now that I have been in Australia over 25 years, how was my life by them? When you wake up 2-3 times at night because the police come to your territory, they take your grandpa, your mom, all the adults, at that time for no reason, just because it's fun. No one was watching. Yeah, we were living too far, so all the Chilean people didn't have no idea what we were going through every day. Going out of your home, of your land, and they are there waiting for you. It's such a horrible, way to a life that you grow up without any rights at all. So, yeah, some of them get so scared. They don't want to live like that. So they want to follow rules because they think in that way they will respect them. But they're wrong, because if you at the end, you're still Indigenous, you're still Mapuche, and if they need to come to your land, they will do it anyway. So yes, we do. We have a lot of Yanaconas because of ignorance, because of the invasion, process, because of the colonization. And at the same time, also we have those Mapuche who like the Chilean way of living. We have some of them who are so used to live the way Chilean people live that they like it. They still identify as Mapuche, but they don't want to go back to the land. They don't want to work the land. They want to live in the cities. That is okay for us. So for us, it's not a problem. The problem became when you start speaking against those ones who want to move back into the land. That's when the problem starts. One thing is your personal decision about being a Mapuche person without living in your land, and something totally different when you start criticizing or making a lie, that's correct, being an ally of those one who believe that we Mapuches don't need the land to live, that as the Constitution said, we are Chileans, all of us. The Chilean Constitution consider every human or every living in the Chilean territory, as they call it, Chilean. See, none of the Indigenous communities will exist for the Chilean Constitution. And that's the way they want to see it. So, and there is some Mapuches who are comfortable with it. And you see that here in Australia too. Indigenous who are in the government here, government who repress, pass law that kills other Indigenous. Yes, we do. But again, we try to respect them as Indigenous, we try to respect them and I'm trying to understand and always try to win them back. You know, we don't think we lost them. We always try to win them back. Is that the question?
Thanks, Marisol. And yeah, there was also another question about, are traditional owners and elders compatible with direct democracy and with deliberative democracy? So I don't know if you want to speak to that at all.
Can you say that again? Sorry.
Are traditional owners and elders compatible with direct democracy and with deliberative democracy? So I guess if you go, yeah.
We have never been included in the democracy, Chilean democracy at all. We have no rights. Everything they promise, they have never delivered what they promised. So I don't know, I don't think so.
Andy, do you want to speak a little bit to what you mean by direct democracy? Because I think it's a bit different than the kind of government democracy.
Yeah, and hey, thank you, Marisol and everybody. Before, just before, even if I may quickly say, one of the things that I have noticed, I also was part of, I think, the talk on Friday or Saturday that was facilitated by this Mayo from Queensland or New South Wales, and Auntie, who is already, she is an elder, and she was also talking in terms of them, I guess, the white and the settlers, and us, the indigenous, and I understand, I think, how that is what things look like in their mind. And also when I hear Marisol and people talk about the Chilean state and them, and then there's us, so there's this clear distinction. And also Marisol made this distinction that often people make between, say, Christianity and Catholicism and the religion of the settlers and the white, and the cosmology of, I would put it in these terms in my ignorant terms, the cosmology of Aboriginal peoples. And then I thought, like, as in, I keep thinking that we keep making these distinctions between them and us all the time. One of the things that I think, for example, I was born in Colombia within us, the settlers, etc. And I was raised in a Catholic household. Many issues with that, homophobic, pederastic, like with children, etc. But also, in my view, the message of Jesus is a message of love and humanity and solidarity and communism, in my view. So what I'm trying to say is, this is the comment in response to the first question, but I will go on to the second question in a second. But my comment is, might there be a place for us to think of ourselves not as us and them, but as all of us together, like as in somehow maybe highlighting the good things that the different things that we know have. Say, for example, Christianity has the homophobia, terrible, let's get rid of that. But Christianity also talks about love, which I suspect Aboriginality or Aboriginal ways of looking at things might also focus on love and things like that. So it is a bit of an invitation to say, think if there are things that, to rather than say, oh, it's all bad, we might want to say, oh, it might be more nuanced than us and them. So that's one comment perhaps. But the question on the traditional owners is, I do see that there is wisdom accumulated in elders and traditional owners, and Aboriginal people, for many reasons, they deserve space and attention more than others. I agree with that. And so that hierarchy, giving them power and voice to the Aboriginals and particularly traditional owners, is important. But also we have been talking about how we need to move on from representative democracy, which is a lot of people giving their voice and power to one individual, and moving on to, it is what I'm hearing today, moving on to a more direct, deliberative, like we deliberate, we argue, and we together somewhere together. So traditional owners and the hierarchy, how is that compatible with direct deliberative democracy? Thanks.
Look, I haven't seen that. I think that I haven't seen any government or anywhere where, you know, you have an idea and you pass it to the majority of the people for them to discuss it. And after what the decision, you know, come from there, the ideas is what you will try to implement. I think that's something that the Chilean people is trying to do today after the 18th of October uprising. You know, they are trying to make sure the grassroots movements and everyone has a voice with the new Chilean constitution. I would like to see that in practice, if that will really happen, you know, and I wish them the best of luck for that to work. You know, for the traditional political parties and the governments not to intervene, you know, and let the people to exercise their right. I think that will be positive if that will work, you know, and that will be the first time in Chile, we talk about Chile. With what you said about God, you know, you need to understand something, Andy, that all those who came to our land in the name of God with the cross, they came to kill us because we were the devil, because we didn't believe in their Western God. That's something that you cannot delete from my history, and no one can delete that from my history. You know, what happened to my ancestors, you know, the ones who managed to survive. But I do understand, you know, how can I believe in the Western God if the people who come representing that God or they believe in that God don't have no respect for us. They don't respect our beliefs. Love, yeah, we all feel that we can love people, but we need to respect people. You know, to be able to give you my love, I need to respect who you are first, you know, without conditions, without thinking that I can try to change that because I don't like whatever you have that I don't like, I can change it. No, I need to accept the way you are. And I can love you, but doesn't know my experience, doesn't know my people's experience, you know, with the people, humans who came, you know, in the name of the Western God, you know, and how you can change that, you know, how you can change that. So I will say that's the reason when we talk about our cosmovision, not because we are perfect, definitely no, but because, for example, myself, I grew up as an Indigenous. I didn't have the opportunity to be a Chilean before an Indigenous. So I grew up without believing in the Western God at all. In my house, it never was mentioned that there was a God where the majority of the people believed there was the Catholic, you know, in looking about Chilean, the big majority, you know, until I was 11, 12 years old, when I was forced by the Chilean government to go into the Chilean school, and they closed our schools. Because Mapuche, they didn't want us to learn our language and our culture. So they want us to go to the normal Chilean school to study speaking Spanish, to forget about our culture and become Chilean people. That's my generation, you know? So there is nothing positive that I learned from the Western God, believe me. He punished me and all my brothers and sisters and everyone from my community in my generation. You know, in the school, I was punished for not believing on him. So, and that's the experience of many of us, you know? So no respect, you know, no understanding. Simple for me, you know, so it's yeah, I have many friends who believe in God. I don't criticize them because you have the freedom to choose, you know, in life. That's the beauty of life, that you can choose, you know, what to do, who you are, and how you want to live your life. And I think respect is the key element, that you need to respect all that. I don't have the right to question any decision made by other person, especially if I love the person. You know, why? Why to question? Why to try to impose my views on that person? That's not right, you know? And I think, at least my community, we are not like that. We don't impose things in people. You know, we don't separate people. For example, in my community, we had people from other sexuality. But we never called them gays or lesbians or things like that. I remember that, I don't know, they were one more. They were part of our community and they were like me and my brother. You see, there was no, I didn't grow up with the difference that when I moved into the Chilean world, wow, it was bad to be gay. It was bad to be lesbian, you know. In my generation, it was bad. People were throwing stones, and it's not a joke to when someone will, you know, identify as having other sexuality. I'm from that generation, you know. So, but in my community, we never saw that, you know. We never saw that, you know. So I grew up in a totally different time, I will say, and where we accept from who we are, you know. But yeah, I don't believe in the Western God. It's not in me, you know. Some people, they choose not to believe after grow up with that, you know, knowledge, because my family passed that to young people, you know. In my experience, I didn't grow up with that. You see, for me to talk about God, I don't feel guilty afterward. You know, I don't feel that something bad is going to happen to me. Like I know that some of my friends that are scared to say things because they can come back to them. For me, I don't know. I don't have that knowledge. I learned about Western God when I went to school with the Chilean people. I learned about religions, you know, but it doesn't identify me at all. Sorry, I hope I answer your question, Andy.
Thanks, Marisol, and also thanks for telling us the experience of you and your people. I think it's really important. And I'm thinking, because we said we'd go till 2. This is epic. We could go all day. But I will remind people as well, for those that are in so-called Melbourne, we will be gathering in Edinburgh Gardens from about 3-ish onwards until late with music, and I'm going to bring a whole bunch of zines. We have a Blockade IMARC 2019 zine that some of you might not have seen yet. We'll have an official launch, and lots of other conversations and food and music. So just remind people that that's on at 3. So we can't go all day as much as I would like to. But we do have our last speaker here, who is Ron Guy. And yeah, Ron has spoken earlier this week as well. Before I go to Ron, I'll just quickly pass on that we were going to have Vicky Abdullah, who came along to our last CANA conference last year, all the way from WA, to talk about her struggles and her community's struggles against mining. But unfortunately, she wasn't able to make it. So yeah, she wanted to pass on her apologies. And yeah, we have Ron, who's the convener for the Vic Australian Western Sahara Association, has been involved in activism and solidarity for a while. And so Ron, we're wondering, what is your alternatives vision for the future post-mining? What ideas do you have and can bring us from your work? Thanks.
Yeah, well, that's a big one after all of the religious conversation. We could go on for a whole different conference about that. Well, I guess in some ways I have to apologise for being the spokesperson for Western Sahara at the moment, because we've had all these fantastic Indigenous speakers throughout the week. But I guess the point of that is that we have to defend other peoples around the world, because they don't always have that opportunity to. So I guess that's the unique part of the work that we're doing in Australia, and the communications that are happening at the moment. But the West Saharans have been living in the refugee camps since 1975, and of course they've been depending on food that's being brought in, but they did get the reputation of being the best run refugee camps in the world, because their distribution of food amongst everybody is so organised and so evenly done that the whole population, and they've been doing studies on this, are growing shorter and shorter, because they're malnourished, they're not getting the proper nutrients, so that relays onto the next population and to the next population. So in some ways, those in the refugee camp are all starving together. There's been a lot of Norwegian and Swedish assistance that's been helping with them there, and a lot of the religious organisations have been working in the camps as well. Now they're 99.9% Sunni, but they're so you made me go into the religious part. But their practices are probably a little bit different to what we know of Muslim practices, or what the Western world portrays the Muslim practice of being. So they hold their women very important. They hold education as important, and so everybody's educated, and you treat each other equally. Now, unfortunately, they've probably had a bit of trust in the system. So in the United Nations and in democracy, and they've played their part and have obeyed all of the rules and the regs as far as warfare goes. And Ramos Horta summed it up when he did a talk in Melbourne. He summed up the way that they've been doing their fighting and warfare. He said that the Fretland probably had some embarrassing things of the way they treated their soldiers or other people, but the West Saharans were pretty much faultless as far as treating their prisoners, treating people they'd captured, and to the point of which they'd caught a lot of Moroccan prisoners, and the ones that had also been killed in open warfare, they would give them a burial. They would take note of where they were, and as far as they were concerned, that they were their brothers. So they were compassionate to that. They took their identification cards, made a record of it, so that the Moroccan parents would be able to see what had happened to their final resting ground. And if you put the opposite to the treatment that the Moroccan armed forces were doing to the West Saharans, is completely opposite, and far from the cry of well, to the point where the West Saharans are still the mothers are still looking for their children to understand what had happened to them. So you can't accuse the Moroccans, the West Saharan side of that, but the Moroccan side you can. Now, I suppose with the subject of supporting themselves and their agriculture, well, they lived beforehand as more of a tribal, different tribes that wandered around, and then they would have tribal meetings. So they'd had almost a little bit similar to the early Indigenous meetings and the movement around different areas, and that ownership, where they would go to in the peak of the summer, they would go to the coast and would depend on fishing and would have settlements, and then in the wetter months they would follow the clouds around. So that's why they're called the people of the clouds, because they would follow the food source around. Wherever it rained in the desert, the grass would shoot up, and then their camels and goats would have some feed. So that was their nomadic existence. Of course, the unfortunate thing that's happened to many cultures is when there's resources that are found. In this case, it was phosphate was the one that the world's crying out for, because there presumably is going to be a short, like peak oil. There's going to be peak phosphate, presumably, and that's where the Western world, or the world, wants to steal their resources. having said that, they've continually obeyed the rules. They had their ceasefire, and then they were ready to have their vote of self-determination, which gave them the option of joining Morocco if they so chose, or they could have their independence. But you would have to say the brutality that's been exercised by the Moroccan forces and police would probably not make you want to vote to be part of Morocco. So at the moment, as just this month, they've returned to war, and unfortunately, like all countries in war, they're usually up against the larger geopolitical position. So France has been a bit of a nasty pasty here, because they treat they sort of treat Morocco as their food bowl and their cheap labour to put vegetables on their table there, and Spain of course is exploiting their fish stocks from off the coast. They've probably got an advantage because Algeria has always been supportive, and when the divisions were being made up of the Western Saharan area, so when Spain was leaving in 1975, ironically, Morocco had to accept that Mauritania wasn't part of Morocco, because Greater Morocco took in part of Algeria, it took in Western Sahara, and it took in Mauritania. And there was a deal done on Franco's deathbed, which is not considered legal by the International Justice Court of Justice, but that's one of the things that Morocco sort of hangs on to. But it was divided in half, so Mauritania could have half, and Morocco the other half. Now Algeria was offered a third of the country as well, so it was dividing up somebody else's indigenous areas, and they were offered a third of it, but they said, well, it's not our land, why should we take that land? So they did the right thing, and since then have been offering them assistance in the United Nations as far as arguing over the different issues and resources. So now they're back at war. You could imagine that that's probably where the extra weaponry will come from. So it's a shame that we can't have a peaceful ending to that. But it's important that the resources not be stolen. So that's where us as activists should be involved in demonstrating against the companies that are benefiting from stolen resources, and we should be approaching our superannuation funds. And if we're in the union, we should be approaching the union, asking them to lend support and to make a statement and pressure the ACTU into supporting a peaceful resolution and the vote of self-determination for the last country, the last colony of Africa. And I suppose because a lot of our talkers have been from South American countries, well then, and that was Spain being the colonizer, that's probably something that they should have in support of Western Sahara as well. Unfortunately, when it comes down to the recognising of Western Sahara, you have the Spanish countries, you have the South American countries, most of them support Western Sahara and recognise it as a non-self-governing country, and you have most of the African countries doing the same. But a lot of the Pacific nations, ironically, including New Guinea, Kiribati, and Solomon Islands, and a lot of those places recognise Western Sahara as well. But occasionally the Moroccan lobbyists and the the Moroccan king's men. They go around lobbying different little despots from different countries, saying we'll give you $100 million and we'll finance you well if you'll take Western Sahara off your list of countries of recognising. Now, most of them they won't recognise Morocco's control over it, but they do move that counting of 80 or so. Norway and Sweden are very good. In Sweden, it nearly got up to recognising. So as once we get a European country to recognise Western Sahara, then the rest will be a lay down misère, and it almost got through. Italy is very strong with recognising the problems that are going on with Western Sahara, and they nearly got a vote through once, but each time it's just missed by that one vote. So I'm probably going a little bit off subject. I've probably gone a little bit off subject there, but and I apologise. I apologise for that. But the way that they've been existing in the refugee camps and on that side is they've got a large diaspora that are living in Algeria and also living in Spain and in Mauritania. So food has been coming across the border and getting into the refugee camps. But since the conflict just started, the different news is coming out. And one of them, I don't know whether I mentioned this before, but there seems to be, according to the West Saharans, at least there's been Moroccan settlers have started to go back to Morocco proper or go to the Canary Islands, and the police have been coming in, the police and the army have been coming into the West Saharans that are living under occupation and beating them up and destroying their houses. So it's got a little bit of a feel of what happened to Timor-Leste when Indonesia lost the vote, lost the referendum, and ended up going berserk and killing all of the Timorese. So unfortunately, there's not much we can do to protect those people in there. We can just depend on social media to get out and to report these things. Do you want me to finish there, or?
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, unless you have anything last to add, I think that was a really good, explanation of something that's happening
right as we speak.
Yeah. Thanks so much for that. And if you could chuck any links or ways that we can stay up to date in the chat, that'd be really useful, and we can share them on Facebook as well.
I did send out one. No, I don't. My technology's not that great, but there was a message of support that was given by a lot of the Spanish citizens and the Spanish musos requesting, and the filmmakers requesting support for Western Sahara, and that Spain do the right thing. So, and it's quite a nice visual film. So I did send it to Lucha. I don't know whether he can put it on.
I think I found it on the website of the Australian West Sahara Association. So I've just chucked that in the chat.
Okay.
So everyone can check it out, which is really good. And I think like it's important while we're talking about kind of alternatives and vision to kind of recognize what is actually happening right now in some places, and that a lot of our kind of visioning and things that we're doing, different things are going to work in different places. And if the West Saharans are, fighting for their lives, then good on them. And, that's showing, while we're building this better world and fighting against extractivism, we need to be able to show solidarity, because comparably Australia's, we're quite a well-off country in general in comparison to places like Western Sahara, and we have a voice on the international stage more than a lot of other places do. So it's really important for us to remember to show solidarity and follow those links while we're building this better world. So thanks, Ron, for coming on and sharing, and yeah, for your work, even though it would be amazing to have someone from Western Sahara to be able to tell the story, and maybe one day we'll be able to get that to happen. It's really good to have you, that you're spreading that story and doing that work. So thanks so much. I mean, I'm not sure if we have any more questions or comments, but we are getting close to 2. This is such a big ongoing conversation. So I'm not sure whether I can just put on the video by Marianna. So if people need to go and get ready to come to the park, then that's completely fair enough, and we can watch it later, or if people want to watch it now. And I think we're also going to leave this Zoom link open for the whole afternoon, because there'll probably be people that can't come along to the park, which is fine. And so this will be a space for whatever happens. Yeah. Rog?
Will this space be at the park? Will this Zoom, or just separate for people who can't get to the park? There won't be a laptop sitting in the park.
Ooh, we can try. I think NATO mentioned. Pardon?
We can join from the park.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think NATO mentioned maybe live streaming some of the music or something. And Andy, if you're going to be there, my phone runs out of battery so quickly, but I can try and call in. So we'll try and have some connection, but I think it's going to be quite emergent, and we'll just have to see what happens. So whoever's here in the space.
Yeah.
Are you going to be online, Rog?
My knees are a bit sore. I'm just going to rest, and I'm going to try and get down there by about 5. I won't be. I might need somebody to wheelchair me in from the car park, all that kind of stuff. Can I tag you, Anissa?
Yeah. Give me a call.
I'm going to have a nap, and I've got another online workshop. So super thanks. Peter's last comment, 2 thumbs up to that. More, follow-ups, wonderful, super duper, so much. Hopefully see you in a few hours, or some of you, or otherwise see you soon.
Yeah, thanks so much. And yeah, for people watching, Peter said so keen to have another workshop where we can discuss all the ideas from today and do some envisioning activities. So that will happen. I will help organize. Anyone else will help me, because I'm not going to do it by myself. And do you want to mention the session next Sunday?
All right.
Okay. I'll find the link. So you just talk.
Yeah, because following the discussion we have in the first panel, and some people proposing to discuss how we can build power from below, and the discussion of the state, and the contradiction we have with the autonomous organization, and if the state or the socialist state will continue with extractivism, and how it's related to what we are doing here. So we put in the session for next Sunday from 2 o'clock. So if people want to join us, the idea is it's an open conversation. So we want to have the mic opens, and everybody can join and discuss this idea, because it's a lot of discussion about, even misunderstood about the socialism in Latin America also, because it's not, maybe people related here socialism with the socialist party that exists here. But socialism maybe is more than that one. We can discuss it. As is different ideas in Bolivia, in Ecuador, and the Zapatistas also talking about the community, the social communities, or socialist communities, and communitarian socialism, or whatever, So that's the idea of the discussion on Saturday, the 6th at 2 p.m. And welcome. You're mute. You're mute.
Thank you. Yep. Yeah, thanks so much for that, Lucho. And I've checked the link in the chat, and I'll put it in the Facebook Live event. And so, yeah, now I will chuck on Marianna, who, unfortunately couldn't come along, but really wanted to be here and has some ideas for post-extractivism. So thank you everyone so much for coming. Stick around. I think after this video, I'm going to play a song which I really, really like. Maybe I'll chuck that in the chat as well, because it's a kind of utopia visioning song. It's very beautiful. So now oh yeah, here we go. Which maybe we can have a sing along in the park, because I think we definitely need new music. More music. Okay, but thank you so much everyone for coming. Thanks to all the speakers, and see you at the park, and enjoy this video. Oh, and I'll just read out about Marianna, who is a Brazilian activist of the World March of Women, an international feminist movement which seeks to change the world and the life of women. As a researcher, she is working on issues related to the impact, especially on women's life, caused by predatory economic models of development and extractive industries, as well as on the feminist economy and the construction of feminist alternatives. So that's kind of perfect for today. And all of these videos will be available on our YouTube once we work that out. But this is, yeah, asking her, what are alternatives beyond extractivism,
and in this sense, it is,
and what are not? Here we go.
And in this sense, it is important to affirm that both in my research and in the movement where I'm part of, we don't believe that there are solutions to extractivism in this framework. We need to completely change our system and change all the oppressions that compose our system in order to challenge effectively extractivism. So we cannot see extractivism as only a matter of extracting nature, because it's much more than that. It's the pillar, one of the pillars over which many oppressions are sustained, because this system is not only capitalist, it is also patriarchal, it is also very racist, it is also very neocolonial and very heteronormative. So we need to challenge all of that. And by saying that, I just want to make a clear, to position myself regarding some initiatives that exist in the corporate world to mask, to fake solutions, to paint in purple or in green the solutions that they want to sell us, right? So, and this is very important when it comes to extractivism, because extractivist transnational companies are very good at faking solutions. So one example that is very common in the world of extractivism is corporate social responsibility. So basically what they do is, okay, we dispossess everyone from their lands, we appropriate all the sources of water, and as I have seen it once in a community, in order to compensate for that, they build a soccer field and a small fake source of non-drinkable water in the main plaza of the community. So they basically destroy everything, but they say, wait a second, we will compensate you. And then there is no discussion about how this compensation is going to happen. It's just like a quick social makeup to the horrible damage, social and environmental damage that they have done. And this happens everywhere. And it's very problematic because it's often used as a way to bargain with the community. But actually, when we see the damage that is done, the environmental damage that is done, and the social damage that it's done by extractivism, we see that actually it's not, there's no compensation there. It's just not let's say even. And it's important to say as well that CSR is inscribed in a very large history of corporate initiatives to detach the harm that they do from their profit-making activity. So if a company comes to your territory and says that they're going to do social things for your community, don't believe it, because it's not going to work. And of course, because we believe that it's not companies who should be providing certain services, right? How can we ensure that, like, for instance, some companies, they build schools, and we understand that there are many communities in which schools are very much needed because people have to, young kids, young girls have to travel far away to have access to school. But is it really a company who should be providing a school to the community? We don't think so, because these are services that education is a common good. It's a right. It should not be in the hands of private agents. So these types of bargains are very common in the fake solutions for extractivism presented by capitalist agents like transnational corporations. And we don't believe that the solution passes by there. The same goes for green economy. I mean, we know that there's a big thing right now about carbon markets, about TEB and TED initiatives and RED initiatives. And these are all initiatives that are like market-based solutions to market-created problems. And we don't believe that the people who created the problem or the entities that created the problem are best placed to solve the problem they created, because they are unable to do that. So the green economy is basically, beyond not solving the problem, it's also actually creating a new frontier of profit making, which is like carbon. Because where else would they go? Because right now the whole world is basically under attack of transnational companies. So they did not have anywhere to go, so they decided to go to the air that we breathe and build carbon markets of it. So it's not a solution, and this is all greenwashing. This is all greenwashing, and at worst case scenario, sometimes it's purple washing as well, because these extractivist companies, they are appropriating feminist discourse by saying that they are agents of empowerment of women by fostering the participation of women engineers, of women in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields. But these are all, I mean, this is not how we, from a grassroots transformative perspective, envision empowerment. Empowerment is not placing a few women on the top while destroying the conditions of life of the majority of the women somewhere else. Empowerment is a collective responsibility, right? So there is no way of empowering one woman and oppressing 100. So this is not how we've envisioned alternatives. For us, alternatives to extractivism are based in another way of doing politics and another way of advancing the economy. And what do I mean by that? I mean that it is important to, first of all, change the lenses through which we see the world. And in order to see that there are many things that do not pass through what we understand as like a closed notion of politics, or our notion of the economy as being everything that happens in the framework of the capitalist economy. The world is bigger than that. And the groups of women, grassroots groups, social movements are already doing a lot of things outside these borders of these two notions, broadening in the end what the economy is and what politics is. And for us, it's really about that, which does not mean to say that we don't need to fight for a state that is actually redistributive, that we don't need to fight to redistribution of land, redistribution of wealth. All of that we need to do. But for us, the real thing is about changing the system. And we will do that, first of all, by self-organizing women. That is, by making sure that women in grassroots communities, women everywhere where they are committed with change, are organized in women-only spaces, be it inside mixed movements or be it in women-only movements, just like ours, that is in which women can build collectively their condition of political subjects. Not one woman, all women together, building politics, building synthesis based on their diversity, not willing to impose one vision of what women are, but building political subjects out of the diverse experiences of women, and building political solidarity as well. And this comes hand in hand with also participating in initiatives such as this one, but also in broader networks of anti-capitalist movements that are everywhere in this world, because capitalism has created problems everywhere. So we are everywhere, and we need to be networked and together, and having a strong sense of internationalist solidarity. But it is also important to challenge the way the economy is built. And for us, this is done through feminist economy. The feminist economy for us, it's a twofold thing. The first thing, it's a political project of change, of challenging the capitalist views of the economy. And why is this important? Because everywhere where we want to build alternatives, we need to challenge the ultimate problem with this system, which in a feminist perspective is this division between economic production and social reproduction. So there is a line that divides what is economic production that is visible and valued, and what is social reproduction that is made invisible and devaluated. So it doesn't matter if the alternative is disruptive in the sense of, I don't know, let's say, ensuring that people will have agroecological food to eat. But if it does not challenge the sexual division of labor, and if it does not place at the center the common responsibility for sustaining life, that this is not the responsibility only of women, it is doomed to failure in a sense, because it's not going to be challenging one of the ultimate pillars of the capitalist system, which is this division between economic production and social reproduction. So we do believe that that feminist economy is a political tool, and it's also a tool, a concrete practice of transformation that comes very much associated with solidarity economy, for instance, which are those initiatives that many of us in the World March of Women are involved, which is about building other economic circuits that are not necessarily, that do not have profit making as their own, as their main goal. So that's, we could say that like normal economy would have the goal of accumulating. So we could think about like verticality, like accumulating capital. And solidarity economy is about being circular and about having other values such as democracy, such as participation, such as local circuits as the core. And the main goal is not to accumulate profit, but to sustain lives, because we need to exchange things. We cannot, no one is self-sufficient, and we need to exchange to be able to have mechanisms of exchange in order to ensure that we will be able to live. And so, and the last thing, of course, this is not exhaustive. This is a non-exhaustive list, but these are some elements for the discussion. The last thing would be, the second last would be just transition. So a transition from this fossil carbonized economy to another way of ensuring that people will have energy, access to energy, in order to have dignified lives, right? And that in this transition, this will not mean destroying all the jobs of all the people, but making a transition that puts life at the center and workers' rights at the center. And finally, but not last, agroecology, because agroecology is also something in which a lot of us are implicated, like participating in these initiatives. And it's for us the way to ensure food sovereignty. And these are very important principles for us. So agroecology is definitely also not only about planting organic food. It's a political project of emancipation through food, through challenging also another pillar of this system, which is junk food, right? So, and also land distribution, access to land, and challenging the power of transnational corporations in the agribusiness sector. Which is very much articulated with the extractivist sector as well, because they all respond to the same logic of putting corporate profit above all. So I would just like to conclude saying that alternatives, or whatever we want to call them, some people don't like the term alternatives. They prefer, I don't know, another way of organizing, another way of sustaining the system, whatever we call it. One, it's not in the framework of capitalist market that it's gonna be actually done. And two, the political subjects of it are women, together with social movements, together with all of those who are committed to change, because they have been suffering from that system disproportionately. It's not transformation and change is not a subject of the enlightened white urban men. It's the subject of all of us, and there is no space for protagonism of only one. It's about collectively building based on multiple agendas, a project that places the sustainability of life at the center. And that means sharing responsibility for sustaining life and acknowledging two things. The first is that, one, we are all interdependent, what means that from the moment where we are born to the moment we die, we depend on the time and labor of other people, usually women, for us to survive, for us to be where we are. And this has to be a principle that organizes society, because the times of society and the labors that we advance often do not serve this purpose of sustaining life. And the second thing is that we are eco-dependent, that nature has what we need. And we depend on nature to keep on living. So it's not logical, it's not ethical, it's not sustainable to be in a system that destroys it. Because if I can conclude by that, the COVID pandemic has shown that we are not living just a public health crisis, we are living a systemic crisis. This is one crisis among many others, but that one that has really touched us in our bodies everywhere, right? Because before, there was also a spatial division of the crisis that some had felt it and others not. And right now, we are all in the same boat. So let's think about what that means, how we got there, and who are and how we are going to challenge that. And for us feminists, it's all about subverting the economic and political system in which we live. Thank you.
There we go. Cool, there's still some of us here. Do people want to hear my lovely song?
Sure.
I wish I could sing it like Dandara did.
Maybe we will need to edit the video if we have a better video with Marianna.
Pardon?
Maybe we'll need to edit this video because Marianna's video was cracking.
Oh, was it? Okay, cool. When we put it on YouTube.
Yeah.
But anyway, for the Facebook Live, hopefully it was good enough. And I'm going to play this song because I want to listen to it.
I thought you were singing it yourself. Oh, but okay, yeah, we'll listen to it.
Sorry,
One day I'll I've been at some pretty amazing conferences and gatherings where people know all the words and they sit around and sing it. So I will learn it. I promise that for next year. If you all learn the words, and there's a lot of words. So here we go.
Together left to crawl from each according to ability, and to each based on need. Here in the place where dreams aren't dead, here in this space between our heads.
Hey, that was pretty awesome. I was trying to look, it was pretty awesome, but I could not understand the 100%. How could I find it on YouTube?
Oh, yeah. Here's the link. And I'll find, actually here is, oh, how am I going to do this? There's a zine that's called Please Read Utopian Fiction. And it's got a bunch of really good books to read. But it also has the lyrics. So once I work out how to do that, I'll send you the link to that zine, and it has all the lyrics at the end so you can read.
Awesome. Awesome. I feel like I need to shower because I haven't. So how are people going to find each other at the gardens today?
I think it's near the Rotunda. Right, Lucho?
Sorry? Yeah.
Yeah, it's near the Rotunda. So do you know where that is?
It sounds like a big round thing.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's close to George's Road, you know? George's.
Yeah. It's near St. George's, and it's right next to the Bowls Club.
Yeah, okay. I'll be on the lookout. But yeah, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, hey, thanks. And we'll catch up later, I guess. But this whole thing has been so great, the whole week. Awesome.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for coming along and all your questions and comments.
Catch you soon. Catch you all soon. Okay, bye.
Ciao. Okay, Lucho, do you want to stop the recording?